recorded.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Thursday, October 22nd meeting of the Hayward Planning Commission. This is a special meeting that's being conducted conducted utilizing teleconferencing and electronic means consistent with the State of California Executive Order 29-20, dated March 17th, 2020, and Alameda County Health Officer Order number 20-10, dated April 29th, 2020, regarding the COVID pandemic. We're streaming this meeting live on the city's website and broadcasting on Channel 15, as well as via YouTube. Please note that we're now using the Zoom platform to conduct our meetings. Members of the public had opportunities to submit comments to the Commission on topics related to tonight's agenda prior to the meeting, and those were distributed to all commissioners via email and posted to the city's website. We'll go ahead and get our meeting kicked off this evening, and we will ask Ms. Chan to begin with roll call, please.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. Commissioner Ali Sullivan.
Good evening, present.
Commissioner Andrews.
Present.
Commissioner Goldstein.
Present.
Commissioner Patton absent. Commissioner Roche.
Present.
Commissioner Stevens.
Present.
Chair Bonilla.
Present.
Thank you. Have a good meeting.
Thank you very much. Okay. We will now move on to public comments. So, Ms. Chan, are there any members of the public who wish to address the Commission this evening?
Thank you, Chair. At this time, we do not have any attendees. No speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to our first item of business tonight, which is a work session, and it's a draft of the Hayward Regional Shoreline Adaptation Master Plan. And we will go ahead and turn it over to staff for a staff report.
Yes, great. Thank you. Nans or anyone from Escape, can you go ahead and share the screen? Okay, there it is. Thank you. Good evening, Chair, Planning Commissioners, and members of the public. My name is Edgar Maravilla. I'm an associate planner with the City of Hayward. And today I'm here to introduce the draft for the Hayward Regional Shoreline Adaptation Master Plan. The Hayward Regional Shoreline Adaptation Master Plan has been an ongoing effort. It's about a 2-year effort now, which has been headed by Scape Landscape Architectures, which is the consultant team, and by way of the Hayward Area Shoreline Planning Agency, which is known as HASPA. HASPA was established in 1970 by way of a joint power authority, and currently it includes 3 different jurisdictions, which are the City of Hayward, Hayward Area Recreational and Park District, HARD, and East Bay Regional Park District. Together, collectively, we make Hayward Area Shoreline Planning Agency, and each jurisdiction has their own representative that shows up to the Hayward Area Shoreline Planning Agency board meetings. Specifically for the City of Hayward, our representative is Councilmember Mendel. And all in all, the purpose of HASPA is to coordinate agency planning activities and adopt and carry out policies for the improvement of the Hayward shoreline for future generations. Hence the reason we started the master plan. Additionally, per the general plan of the City of Hayward, we do have a policy in there that calls for the shore realignment master plan, which just translates to a shoreline master plan. This is all possible by way of a Caltrans grant that HASPA received, and the City of Hayward City Council officially accepted that grant late 2018. And in early 2019, Scape officially kicked off the master shoreline plan. With that said, before I go ahead and transition over to Scape and let them do their presentation, we do want to hear from all of you today on this draft. I would encourage to focus on the policy aspect of the plan, as that's what's going to have the most impact from a planning perspective. But we definitely want to hear all your comments about it. And with that, I'll go ahead and formally send it off to Scape.
Thanks so much. So I'm Gina Worth. I'm the design principal at Scape Landscape Architecture. And our firm, along with the talented team, has helped lead the Hayward Regional Shoreline Adaptation Master Plan over the past 2 years. I'll be giving a presentation this evening, but I also wanted to point out that both Nick Shannon and Nans Veron are joining me on the call tonight and are key partners in this work and part of the Scape team and here to help answer your questions. I think we're trying to present in about 15 minutes tonight, which, as you can imagine, from a 2-year effort is quite an effort to condense it all down, but we're excited to share the significant progress this team has made. So tonight we'll walk through the process of the master plan, the many different steps, tasks, and phases that the project has gone through. We'll look at some of the baseline assumptions that drove the master plan that were really collected from key stakeholders and members of the public. We'll provide a brief overview of how to read the master plan document and provide links to it and talk a little bit about next steps for the project. So the process. Our project schedule is shown here on this slide. As Edgar mentioned, we started in February of 2019 with a project initiation and site research phase and have moved through this sequence, going through many iterative, informative tasks and are now here in September at the final draft master plan. After this moment in time, the project is it's currently under agency and board review and in a period of final public comment. And from that, this work will be finalized into the final master plan. But we are actively receiving comments both tonight and with the general public. So I'll walk through each of the phases that our project team went through. Our first task was the project initiation and site research phase. This can be found as a chapter in the final master plan document, but it goes through and analyzes the ecosystems, the infrastructure, and the cultural and social fabric of Hayward and the Hayward shoreline. Our second task was really led by our teammate, Arcadis Engineering, and was focused on collecting data and mapping sea level rise and groundwater impacts to the Hayward shoreline. You can see in the maps here, there's an analysis both of the topography of the different current and water conditions that surround the site, and a mapping of future sea level rise projections within the Hayward shoreline, as well as groundwater rise projections within the Hayward shoreline, and flood projections with sea level rise and without sea level rise, for example, the 100-year flood. So we looked at all of these different various scenarios that led us to the development of the adaptation response. We've also done public outreach throughout this entire project. It's been very important not to just do public outreach once a plan has been developed, but to do it throughout the process to solicit feedback early and often. You can see many of our different stakeholder and public workshops mapped here in concurrence with our timeline. We've even held some outdoor events when gathering was still appropriate with a public shore tour that we held in October of last year, where we gathered along the shoreline and had an interpretive walking tour for members of the public interested in contributing to the master plan and finding out more about the space. This work has also been supplemented with many iterative meetings with key stakeholders to bring and build consensus around the adaptation effort. Public outreach is still ongoing, and it's encompassed multiple online surveys, over 13 stakeholder meetings, 3 stakeholder key workshops, a public shore tour, as I mentioned, and 2 online public forums. The final public and stakeholder comment period is currently live on our website now. It was from October 12th to November 30th. There's also been multiple articles, publications, and mentions of the project within social media. So task 4 for the project team pulled together much of our early project feedback and established a set of project goals for the work. These are our high-level goals. There's a number of additional objectives and sub-goals within our final document, and we encourage you to take a look. But as a high-level summary, one of the major goals is to create a resilient shoreline for people and ecosystems within the Hayward area, to enhance the shoreline environment to reduce risk to critical infrastructure and built assets. The Hayward shoreline is an incredible combination of natural systems and built systems like drain lines, wastewater plants, levee infrastructure, and other critical infrastructure assets. We're also aiming to build social resilience into the community, create space for education and for the awareness of climate change over time. And finally, to build capacity for future generations to adapt to climate change. Also in task 4, we began to collect and analyze different potential adaptation responses. So we polled our key stakeholders, we met with other professionals working around the Bay Area and also working nationally, and tried to identify a range of strategies that might be suitable to think about in relation to the Hayward shoreline. So one example is shown here of looking at fine or coarse-grained beaches to help reduce erosion along the edge. Each strategy was analyzed for its pros and its cons, and is a kind of encyclopedia of strategies is included as part of our final master plan or draft final master plan. In task 5, it was our job to take these different discrete strategies, especially the ones that stakeholders responded favorably to, and especially ones that could have and help address the risks that Hayward faces, and combine them into different distinct design alternatives. So as part of this approach, we developed 3 alternatives. One establishes a line of protection and natural ecosystem regeneration closer to the bay. Our third alternative looks at a line of protection for the larger Hayward industrial neighborhood and larger scale ecosystem creation further inland. And one strategy, our second strategy, looked at a system that was more down the middle. Each of these different alternatives had different pros and cons. They were received differently by different stakeholders, and they had different project costs associated with them. Through a long process of stakeholder conversation, of public feedback, and of engineering analysis, we landed on the preferred alternative, which is included in the master plan. And I think we're very happy that our key stakeholders support this preferred alternative and have had their voices heard within this process. I'll speak a little bit more to this later. And in this kind of final task, we have helped wrap up this preferred alternative in a larger visual and written document, the draft master plan, which we really urge that this group spends some time with and reviews and continues to provide a comment during the comment period. So this is a report. This is our draft final master plan. It's a approximately 250-page report. It has been updated and includes HASPA board and agency review comments. It includes a section on implementation considerations, a phasing plan for near-term and long-term projects, and also has cut sheets for important implementable projects. It also includes a large appendix that is a written record of all the stakeholder and public comments from all of our past meetings, and another second appendix for cost estimates. There's an implementation timeframe proposed with the master plan, and this is very important because planning is really just the first step or the first seed of a longer critical process. And so with this timeline and with the implementation section of the report, we have identified projects that can be priorities for the implementation short term, approximately today, 2020, through the next decade to 2030. A medium-term projects would span to about 2040 or 2050, and then long-term projects, which will really take quite a lot of planning, quite a lot of fundraising, and quite a lot of development over time. And we've looked at this short-term, medium-term, and long-term horizon because we know the impacts of sea level rise and coastal flooding are there and are coming, but we do have some time to be able to plan for these future risks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the master plan itself and some of the assumptions driving the master plan. So this is a very basic diagram that we use to speak with stakeholders and talk about the process. The diagram shows what some might consider a very extreme scenario of developing a line of protection to help protect communities and ecosystems from sea level rise right at the bay's edge. This would essentially cut off the community and the natural ecosystems that need bay water from that bay water. We also looked maybe at this alternative C, where is a more extreme approach where potentially parts of the Hayward area would retreat over time and large areas would be dedicated or turned back into natural systems. We ultimately chose not to look at any of these scenarios and really focused on what we felt were options that fell within this this kind of concept of the diagram B shown here, which is that these needed to be implementable solutions that didn't require retreat of established communities, but that also didn't suggest that we were protecting every single piece of the shore with a built perimeter levee, which is not feasible or cost effective. So we think these are very middle of the road alternatives that were developed, the 3 alternatives that were analyzed, and all implementable. And so that is where we focused our direction and our feedback. Feedback from stakeholders and members of the public really drove this direction for the alternatives. This drawing compiles the assumptions that helped frame and shape the master plan. We heard from many key stakeholders, like stakeholders of the critical infrastructure of wastewater treatment plants, like the Hayward wastewater treatment plant and the Oraloma wastewater treatment plant, and many other key infrastructure assets, like the industrial district within Hayward, that those assets were to remain in place for our approximately 50-year study timeframe. We also know there are assets that can adapt in place. Many of the natural assets have the ability, if fed with sediment and proper water flows, to adapt in place. And there are some assets that can potentially either adapt or relocate within the site. Some ecosystems, that same type, can be restored elsewhere if they are vulnerable to sea level rise. Some pieces of built infrastructure, like the Bay Trail, has the ability to be relocated or kind of vertically retreat over time. So this is that assumptions map that drove our work. We also looked at different sea level rise scenarios and how we can begin to categorize and understand and design for different levels of risk. This is a planning effort, so there's not a cost benefit around a specific target elevation. However, we did use the elevation of 14.3 NAVD 88 for planning purposes to understand how perimeter protection features like levees could tie back into the existing fabric and protect parts of the community. This aligns or exceeds VCDC policy and Alameda County Flood Control District policy, as well as meets FEMA certification goals. This doesn't mean that any of these features would be built at that elevation. Each of these would have to go through its own individual analysis. So within the master plan document, we have renderings and images of what the shoreline could look like in an adapted future. Here you're seeing an image of many of the different types, the diverse types of natural ecosystems coming together. In the foreground, a horizontal levee that has a potentially a treated wastewater or a kind of vegetated ecotone slope pulling off of it that creates migration space and refuge for habitats hit by sea level rise. Large expanses of existing and restored marsh, for example, like in the current day Oliver salt ponds, which over time are quite vulnerable to sea level rise and proposed to be turned into tidal marsh when it's appropriate. And pieces of public infrastructure and educational infrastructure, like the Bay Trail, which weaves through this image and is located on top of a large perimeter protection levee, this horizontal levee, which helps protect the communities and both the marsh features and infrastructural features of the Hayward wastewater treatment plant. This represents our preferred alternative and the vision that's been put forward through this process for the Hayward regional shoreline adaptation. I'm happy to return this page and kind of go through this in detail, but what you're looking at here is a hybrid of both natural systems proposed to be invested in and built harder systems proposed to be invested in over time to help both the ecological and the social and cultural assets of the Hayward shoreline be protected from sea level rise. Certain features like flood protection levees are shown in red, so you can see this perimeter line of protection, which roughly follows that down the middle approach with some important key distinctions, wrapping the Alameda County and West Whitten landfills, wrapping the west side of the former oxidation ponds, and tying back into the neighborhood and wrapping the Salt Marsh Harvest Mouse Preserve on the east side, tying back into the San Mateo Bridge approach to the south. Ecosystems proposed to be continued or preserved as tidal marsh features are shown in this green color. And some features like the Oliver Salt Ponds are proposed to be restored into tidal marshes over time as sea level rise prevents them from staying salt ponds in perpetuity. We also think there's the potential to preserve critical endangered species and endangered species habitat, like with the least churn colony and other sites within the project. And so this project, or this alternative overall, is a kind of summary of months and months of stakeholder conversation around different options, different alignments, and represents the best and most supported scenario for protecting the shoreline from sea level rise. So all of this planning, all of these techniques proposed for the future do come with real costs, right? And this is not a project that's proposed to happen in 1 year or in 5 years. This is a project that has a very long planning horizon. But it was very important for the HASPA team that we develop a serious cost estimate for how much this proposal could cost over time, all of the accumulated costs. So you can see here a quick summary of the different items and the different elements proposed: the relocation of the Bay Trail, erosion protection along the shoreline, enhancement and reconstruction of the interpretive center, construction of the line of protection, construction of stormwater management features that support the line of protection, as well as restoration of tidal habitat and enhancements to wastewater treatment facilities. In total, this work totals up to about the numbers shown here, and then with contingencies, with a very healthy contingency of 50%, does total almost $1 billion over this time period. We've also looked at annualized operations and maintenance costs totaled here for each of these different features, kind of added up over time. So these costs are real, these costs are large, but we're not suggesting that we're starting day one with these types of techniques. It was important to look at the order of magnitude cost to understand the investment that may need to be made over time to adapt to sea level rise. However, we have a very detailed phasing strategy to help HASPA implement this work and also be very competitive with grant funding to implement this work and start some of these early projects today. I'm happy to return to this and speak more about our phasing plan, but we're looking here at that short-term and medium-term sections. Obviously, the long-term becomes a lot more ambiguous in terms of exact start dates or the time limits or permitting periods that things might take. But many very early level projects were identified: the Oraloma Interim Levee, the Salt Marsh Harvest Mouse Preserve Interim Levee, the Cogswell Marsh Pilot, the Hayward Shoreline Interpretive Center renovations, many types of marsh restoration, including the Hayward Marsh Restoration, which is a study that's undergoing today, and the Oliver Salt Ponds restoration. These are just a couple of the projects that were proposed for this early short-term kind of planning, investigation, and implementation. They do align and overlap with other key studies happening in the area and the region, particularly the work being done by the Alameda County Flood Control District. We think there's a lot of synergy and opportunities to overlap the work there and have been in direct conversation with them, as well as opportunities to overlap with the work being done by EBDA. So each of these projects that we've identified, we've pulled apart and we've developed a project cut sheet around. We've provided a summary description of each of these different projects. We identified the key stakeholders. We've looked at the project site and ownership opportunities and constraints. We've recommended potential funding and financial opportunities that could be applied to each of these projects. We've developed order of magnitude cost for them and the potential hurdles or opportunities with permitting. So we hope that these different cut sheets are a good way for different entities like yourself to be able to dig into some of the projects and think about initiatives that could be taken on to help preserve the health and well-being of the greater Hayward shoreline community. Very important for this team was policy and programmatic recommendations. So a couple are shown here. I would really recommend that this group take a deeper look at the policy recommendations. Many of them focus on enhancing regional dialogue around sea level rise adaptation. And I think ones that are very specific to this organization are the recommendations to increase flood protection standards for new constructions and renovations within those zones of sea level rise impact, and to remove regulatory impediments to higher standards of flood protection to help incentivize and encourage adaptation, even at the private individual parcel scale. We've also recommended some options that could be looked into to help provide support for property owners to help protect assets through loans, grants, and tax incentives. Obviously, this work is not happening in a vacuum. It's been in collaboration with Charge and many other groups around the region looking at adaptation plans. I will say that HASPA, I think this plan is one of the furthest along adaptation plans and kind of at the front of the crowd in terms of developing an actionable and implementable strategy for adapting to sea level rise. But it's also critical that partners and adjacent neighbors do the same and that these plans remain coordinated over time. So with that, I'll talk very briefly about next steps. I think I'm a little bit over time. Our next steps is that our draft final master plan is open for public feedback and stakeholder feedback today, and will be through, I think, the end of November or very early December. Our website is live and this work is all up there. It's possible to download the full master plan or specific chapters that you're interested on the website. And I think with that, I'll stop the presentation and definitely open it up to Q&A. I know it's quite a lot of content. It's been a long process, and we're happy to kind of go back and share any further information that anyone wants to hear about. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Denise, before Ms. Chan, before we go into Q&A, is there any public members who want to make a comment on this item?
Thank you, Chair. Let me check. Members of the public, if you wish to speak and you're using the Zoom application, please click the raise hand button. If you are dialing in, press *9 to raise your hand on the phone and use *6 to unmute yourself. If you are streaming the meeting through Zoom on your computer, but dialing in via phone, please mute yourself so that there is no feedback sound during the meeting. If there is disruptive feedback or excessive noise during the meeting, your audio will be disabled. Chair, at this time, we have 2 attendees, but nobody has raised their hand. Chair?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Chan. You said that we have 2 attendees, but no one has raised their hand. So we will go ahead and close the public comment period and go on to commissioner questions, comments, and input related to this work session item this evening. Commissioners who would like to comment or ask questions or provide any insights, please raise your hand and we'll get the work session moving. Commissioner Andrews, did you want to start us off?
Sure.
Thanks.
So thank you for the presentation. Excellent report and graphs, and thank you to staff and the subcommittee that reviewed this. Climate change is real, and so protecting our shoreline is really important because we have a lot of critical infrastructure there. And I was curious to hear more about, it seemed like there was some residential on the northern end of it, and just wanted to see, are there additional protections that are recommended specifically because there's residential there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to ask Nans and Nick to also chime in. You know, our study area was this black boundary here. But you can see that, to achieve some level of flood protection in this area, we did need to move outside of our study area with this red line here when we proposed connecting to San Lorenzo Creek and protecting more of the Oraloma wastewater treatment plant, which could have great, positive impacts to the residential communities behind. I think a lot of that work needs further collaboration and further study with the San Lorenzo community. And that, we were really only tasked with looking within this particular black dotted line as part of the study boundary, but it felt like there are clear opportunities to continue the strategy further north along the shoreline and protect more of the residential neighborhoods beyond.
Okay. Is there a plan to study it that you're aware of that could be in the works?
Not that we are aware of. I know that the Alameda Flood Control District has been looking at potentially raising some of the levees along San Lorenzo Creek. They are conducting a slightly different study in terms of impact of both sea level rise and increased precipitation at the same time. But in terms of shoreline resilient planning, there is no study that we've been aware of for the northern part of the unincorporated land, which is county and not city. Yeah.
Okay, well, I would encourage this committee to at least write a letter of recommendation to the county saying that this area needs to be studied. My aunt lived in New Orleans, and when the levees broke, all her assets were gone, her home, her car. So this has a very special place in my heart, trying to protect the shoreline here. And I feel like there was a lot of studies on what happened to the industrial area. And I understand this is a study area, but the residential needs to be taken into account. And just to follow up with my family's personal story, she went to Baton Rouge and her house was flooded in Baton Rouge as well. So I say all this to say is that, yes, we're studying for a 100-year flood, but there are, unplanned events that are becoming a regular occurrence. So I feel like that should be a higher priority. And even if it's not our study area, we need to push for it. The other question I have is I really appreciate you incorporating more of a natural effect to help with the absorption of flooding, and just wanted to know what can we do right now? Like, I know there's a short-term plan, there's a medium plan, long-term, but what is the right now low-hanging fruit that we can do immediately to help with this?
Perfect. Nans, do you want to take that?
Sure. So as part of the master plan, we've been able to identify a couple of projects, and there are a couple of initiatives that are already ongoing. Okay. And I'm thinking more specifically about the First Mile project, which is an initiative led by Oraloma and EBDA, and that's looking at creating an horizontal levee in the back of Oraloma Marsh. We know that there is another study going on, also led by partially EBDA and the city of Hayward, looking at potentially transforming part of the oxidation ponds into a treatment wetland. And so all of those things, including and I'm going to add a third project, actually, the Hayward Marsh Restoration Project, which is being led by East Bay Regional Park. All of those projects are kind of ongoing already. The studies are getting started. All of those require much more, analysis and engineering, feasibility analysis moving forward, but they will be the kind of low-hanging fruit. We know that there are also potential stakeholders in the area that will be interested in funding more projects. We know that BART is actually doing a project nearby, and they're really trying to find a place to mitigate some of the effects of their projects. And so they were willing to participate and fund some of the projects that were identified in the master plan as a way to get that mitigation money and that mitigation trade-off going on. So there are real opportunities in the near future. We've also identified many grant applications and many funding sources as part of the master plan. And we've been working actively with the technical advisory committee at HASPA to think about next steps in terms of funding strategies and opportunities. We know that FEMA is going to release a lot of money next year, so the next grant funding cycle is coming up. We are talking about the FEMA BRIC program, and we are talking about somewhere between $10 and $50 million being available in the region to fund some of those projects. So I think the first step is really to be able to get the funding and to make sure that the projects that are ongoing have kind of a path to move forward towards permitting and implementation.
Okay, and then I understand there's a lot of industrial there, and we are getting requests for projects to build more industrial in that area. And you were saying that we could incorporate some things to help with mitigating this. So could you go a little bit more specific? Is it like a certain type of landscaping? Is there certain types of building material that we can do to help mitigate some of the impacts of development in this area?
Yeah, I think there are different things that could be, thought about. The first one is definitely the elevation at which the buildings will be set, making sure that, most of them will be out of the floodplain. And so kind of increasing the recommendations from a planning standpoint, making sure that, the buildings could be wet or dry flood-proofed moving forward, making sure that the utilities will be higher up, potentially on the roof. But I think thinking long term, I think we also need to think about does that make sense for those buildings or those development to be in that close proximity to the shoreline? Mm-hmm. Because what we've identified is it's not just an issue of tidal flooding coming from the bay, but we also know that the water table is going to rise. And so we might actually see additional impacts of sea level rise behind the line of protection. And so I think there is a bigger question for the city and, for many cities along the bay to think about long term and think about potentially relocating or incentives to relocate some of these buildings and infrastructure.
Yep. I know that happens in a lot of cities. Oh, go ahead, Gina. You want to say something?
I'm sorry. I was just going to add, I think this point that's made here in point 2 about looking at the appropriate base flood elevation and considering adding a more generous freeboard to that number, which is a kind of additional elevation above the base flood elevation that many cities are beginning to require, helps add a buffer for sea level rise. So many cities are beginning to adopt this approach of saying that about development in vulnerable areas that's anticipated to be impacted by sea level rise needs to have a larger freeboard associated with the base flood elevation standards for new construction.
Okay. And then my last question is about the Bay Trail and the Interpretive Center. I was out there and I see that there are some piers that the center is built on. I'm assuming that's the same, like what you're talking about in terms of the recommendation you're making for buildings that want to come in this area. But I was also thinking about the trail, and I know in some tourist locations where they're experiencing this, the same situation we have at our shoreline, is tourism driving it further? Like, does it contribute? Does it impact it even more? Does it exacerbate it of us walking these trails, bringing our cars to walk the trails? Is it contributing to the degradation of this area?
I think the major feature, we've talked with a lot of the people responsible, like Mark Taylor from the East Bay Regional Park District, who's responsible for maintaining the day-to-day operations of many of the park spaces and the Hayward shoreline. What we hear from them is that the biggest impact to many of the trails, particularly trails today that are right along the edge, is erosion from wind and wave events, and that it's not really from the use of people or foot traffic or bicycle traffic. Those are obviously always considerations and wear and tear of a trail, but really that the biggest impacts are from erosion. And so we only anticipate those impacts to get bigger over time, which is why our team has proposed a phased kind of retreat strategy for the Bay Trail, where today it might be up along the bay's edge, but in a decade, we might have two trails, a new trail that's built and a smaller footpath along the edge. And then in 2 or 3 decades, we might just have the higher, newer trail because of sea level rise.
And maybe just to add on that, Gina, I think, the impacts of, bicyclists or pedestrian on the Bay Trail are very minimal. One thing we are really trying to advocate for with the master plan is that question of education and stewardship. And so, you really care about the things that you can see and almost touch. And so making sure that, it's less about tourism, but making sure that we can provide a space for people to be educated and become stewards of their environment will be very important. So providing access along the edge and, within that amazing landscape and that mosaic of habitat is really something that we are trying to put forth with the master plan as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Commissioner Andrews. Commissioner Ali Sullivan, do you want to go next?
Sure. All right. So 3 comments and a question. I'll try and be quick just to respect everyone's time. The first comment, I just wanted to thank city staff, residents, and Ms. Worth, your team on pulling this report together. It is quite impressive, very comprehensive, and the amount of process that's gone into this, I can tell that it has been quite deliberative in moving it forward. And so I wanted to thank you and everyone else who's participated in this to get us to this point. 2 thoughts. Oh, the other thing I would say is I was happy to see that the interpretive center is going to be raised. My nieces and nephews like to go there. I'm very familiar with that site. And so it's nice that that will remain in place. So the first thought is around coordination. And as I was looking at this plan, I recognize that it is one tiny piece of the puzzle in the entire bay. And so I was happy to hear that you mentioned some of the work that's happening in relation to our work, and the work that we're doing is not happening in a vacuum. What's very clear, though, is if other localities, if other constituencies are not putting the same level of thought and process and level of importance on this as we are, all of our efforts presumably could be for naught if, let's say, on the other side of Highway 92, Union City, for example, doesn't build the same level of robustness in their mitigation strategy. The same could be said for the north of us. And so the important piece here, I think, is ensuring that there's very good coordination among all of the different jurisdictions to ensure that the same expectations as far as climate change are being met, and that everything we're doing will fit together and will protect at that same level of protection. So I think it's important just to ensure that that's happening. I'm sure it is, but just something that that crossed my mind as I was looking at this piece. The other important thing I think to note is the cost. So you said $1 billion for our tiny piece of this. If you sort of project that out, around the entire bay, this is the cost of this is the GDP of some European or Eastern European countries. And so you think about the billions of dollars that'll be spent to protect the shoreline. It's staggering. The important thing, though, that I think about is it's not just a Hayward problem. It's not just something that we need to worry about. If Hayward, per se, doesn't choose to protect the shoreline, that impacts everyone. That impacts everyone around us. That impacts people east of us. And so while it is potentially within our city limits, the responsibility, I think, should be borne by more than just Hayward. And I think there needs to be a recognition, broadly speaking, throughout the Bay Area that what we do in Hayward on our piece of the shoreline, or what any other jurisdiction does on their piece of the shoreline, will have significant impacts for the rest of the region. The last point is a question. And in the staff report, I just pull this up right now. The staff report notes that the city shall examine the potential long-term impacts of climate change on the social, economic, and environmental well-being of the city, and that the city shall support plans, standards, regs, incentives, and investments to reduce the impacts of climate change on those populations most vulnerable to the impacts. Now, I take it that this report is mainly around sort of the built environment and the geographic concerns as it relates to climate change. What I'm curious though is, and it doesn't have to necessarily be tonight, but I'd be curious to hear what the city is doing around really protecting those vulnerable populations, and then how some of those vulnerable populations were able to provide input into this plan. I think it's important that their voice is heard. And so I'm curious if you feel like those vulnerable populations have been, their concerns have been properly addressed, if they've had the opportunity to express their concerns, or if we need to do a better job of reaching out to them to ensuring that we're hearing from them.
Is that a question for the design team, or do you want Eric and Edgar to respond with a staff report?
Either or. I think on the staff piece, city might be able to help, but Gina, you might have a better sense as far as that input piece in the discussion so far.
Yeah, I think with the input piece, one of the most successful pieces of outreach we were able to work on was our online survey. Nans, we had like almost 1,000 responses. Yeah, we had 1,000 responses to our initial online survey, and then many hundreds of responses to our follow-up that was specifically related to the proposal. And there we were able to find out that we were getting feedback from like local businesses and people with actually living or residing adjacent to the study area, or operating a business or visiting a business within the study area. So I think with that coverage, our team was very pleased with that. Our in-person events were smaller, obviously. They were just smaller events along the shoreline, but they were very successful in, I think, reaching some youth populations and being able to have hands-on educational engagement about the shoreline. But I completely agree. I think there's still much work to be done. One planning study can't inform everyone on the risks of sea level rise. This is a kind of continued effort and almost like stewardship exercise that needs to keep happening, and the engagement needs to keep going past the moment of this plan, because it's very difficult when you're living in a vulnerable neighborhood that might be a mile or 2 miles from the water's edge, to know when your property is vulnerable. And so we have really made sure to make all of the sea level rise maps available. They're also available on the online portal, where you can go in and see the fabric of the city and see how your house or your business or your favorite coffee shop kind of aligns with that risk.
Great, thank you.
And maybe just as Gina was saying, I think, public engagement, especially with the scale of the plan, is never enough. But we have still a pretty long public comment period between now and the beginning of December. But I think, asking and making sure that the city and the different stakeholders and the different ASPA members really kind of reach out through their social media platforms, through their website over the next few weeks is going to be very important to reach out those more underserved constituents. I would also say that one thing that wasn't really part of the contract is that question of language and translation. But I think, if you have like community leaders that are willing to go into the neighborhoods, meet with the people, meet with the neighbors, and translate part of the document, I think that would also be very important to reach out to, the broader constituency of the city of Hayward.
I appreciate you raising that. So that raises a question if city staff can look into that, because I wouldn't want someone to not be able to provide input for lack of ability to read the language that it's printed in.
All right.
Yeah, that's something definitely we can do. I know we do have certain individuals who are interpreters at the city who essentially get an additional stipend for that. And if we do have any pamphlet or any information that we are to put out to the public, per se, then at that point, it could be interpreted to several different languages. So that's a great recommendation there. Thank you, Commissioner.
Well, thanks to Nance for mentioning that.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldstein.
Yeah, thank you. Quite an in-depth report. Clearly a lot of thought and detail has gone into this report, and I thank you for that. I also want to say that my colleagues ask some really compelling questions, and sometimes when it's my turn, I feel a little hesitant, thinking that mine aren't going to be as good. But I hope you'll stay awake long enough and bear with me. and I promise not to be a talkaholic. One question is, with this study, does it include the combined effects of seawater rise and water table rise? Okay, I see you nodding your head. Do you care to comment on that?
Yeah, I'll comment briefly. So we both studied the impacts of sea level rise and groundwater emergence, which is groundwater impacts. And that's included in our task 2 report, which I'll bring up here. We have these different maps. Arcadis made a special point of mapping sea level rise and flood impacts on one map in blue and groundwater emergence outside of that zone of sea level rise, or potential zones of groundwater emergence over time in the green. And we also have combined maps where they're overlaid. You can see them working together. Many of our planning and policy recommendations also focus on things that can be done for groundwater. And there's a section in the report that deals with potential responses to groundwater impacts.
Okay, very good. So in the 1989 earthquake, I don't know how familiar you are with what happened in the Marina district of San Francisco, but as water saturates the ground and the shaking begins, some areas, whether they're landfill or not, just the constituency of the soil there, as the water increases, causes another phenomenon. The shaking causes another phenomenon referred to as liquefaction. And does any part of this study deal with those effects of liquefaction?
Yeah, so this study is a high-level planning study, and it's not getting into the details of exactly how a piece of infrastructure could or should be built. But the engineers on our team, Arcadis is a global engineering firm. Their office here for this study is based in San Francisco and in Alameda County. They're very aware of the specifics of the Bay Area, and they were the entity to really perform the cost estimate. And in the cost estimate, they looked at levee construction types that would deal with liquefaction and be resilient to it over time. There's no silver bullet, right? An earthquake can, impact any type of infrastructure, but special precautions were embedded into the cost estimate to consider infrastructure that could be most resilient to both earthquake and sea level rise risks.
Okay, very good. Stay on the slide, please, because I have a few questions about this. These cost summary items, are these the line items that would occur over a 20-year period, or are these like right out of the gate, if you're going to accept this preferred alternative solution, are these costs that are going to be basically from day one or year one, and then take maybe 3-5 years of time to complete?
Now, do you want to handle that? I believe the costs are to acting as if you were executing the entire master plan at one moment in time, which is not the recommendation, but it's just to add up the order of magnitude cost of the project.
Yeah, the cost estimate is mostly a reference that we use to also compare the different design alternatives that we had at some point. And as Gina was saying, is the cost right now is if you were to build everything tomorrow. Obviously, we know that that's not going to be the case. That's not what we recommend. And we also acknowledge that that cost might fluctuate over time, because if you start to spread out some of that cost on, the next 20, 30, 50 years, we know that there is an escalation that should be considered, which is not embedded here because we don't really have the phasing, worked out entirely, I would say. So it's been kind of just a tool for us to assess and to compare some of the alternatives we had on the table.
I see. Okay, so it's a moment in time snapshot of what you think the cost would be today. Is that actually called out or pointed out in the report anywhere?
It should be part of the description. I will double check, and that's definitely, if it's not the case, that's definitely the type of comment we're looking for the final version, making sure that we can caveat the cost estimate, definitely.
Good.
Yeah.
Very good, because I would recommend that, because obviously big infrastructure projects like that usually occur over a 5 or 10 year period, sometimes longer.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And of course, there are all kinds of things. You know, inflation's really low right now, but that could change in the next election. Sorry, I didn't mean to turn that into a political statement. I just simply meant that things change. So forgive me for that comment. And then also things, you know, there's, you know, we have wildfires here, and who knows when the next earthquake's going to happen. And those types of natural disasters locally tend to drive up construction costs, let alone that even events as far away as Texas and New Orleans can have a serious impact on our ability to source materials for things. So I would like that part called out. And then was any consideration given to the consequences of growth, anticipated growth over the next 20 years? Because I don't know if you're aware of this, but right now at this moment in time, I think we have somewhere around $3.5 or $4 billion worth of projects that have been approved by the planning department and in the process of being built. And we're thinking over the next 20 years that number is probably going to accelerate, not decrease. So was there any consideration given to growth?
Yeah, I think we've been in conversation with Eric about some of the initiatives within the city of Hayward around growth and around investment and development. You know, we've heard very clearly that the industrial business district is an important economic asset and one to be preserved by this plan and to enable the potential growth of that district. And I think that has really fed into our policy recommendations there to think about as that district evolves and as investment continues to occur within the study area that we were examining, that the zoning and building standards for any buildings within a zone of future sea level rise or flood or groundwater emergence also adapt and be strengthened to accommodate those future risks.
All right, good, very good. And this may seem like a crazy question, but I imagine people are going to ask this one. What if we do nothing? What's the potential cost or impact if we don't do anything? Is that brought up in the report anywhere?
It's not a crazy question. It's actually an excellent question. And so it wasn't part of the scope of work as part of that study to do that analysis, which, you know, is almost like another project in and of itself, just because of the complexity and the nature of both the infrastructure and the kind of ownership pattern of Hayward. But that's definitely something that, you know, moving forward could be a study that the city or HASPAC could undertake in the near future to be able to compare. But what we know is that there is obviously a benefit to the investment, you know, that represent that master plan.
Gina, I'll add though, Nans, that while we were not scoped to do a cost estimate of the cost of doing nothing, we did do maps and a assessment of the infrastructure, neighborhoods, and private parcels at risk in the do nothing scenario. So we have visualizations of the do nothing scenario, but the scope was not there to do a cost estimate of do nothing.
Okay, all right, that's fair enough. I think that will probably paint a clear enough picture to our communities that might be affected to have them better understand that we actually need to do something. And that was the main point of that question. All right, good, very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Goldstein. Commissioner Stevens, do you have any comments?
Yes, thank you. I just have one quick question. I appreciate your discussion regarding groundwater emergence. I'm just curious if there's contaminated sites within the zone of flood risk. And if there's contamination in the soils, can the groundwater mobilize those contaminants and move it to adjoining parcels and potentially spread contamination throughout the area? And if that is true, and if that's the case, would there be some good policy recommendations to make regarding potential redevelopment within this zone related to remediation of those sites?
I think that's a great point. And certainly multiple types of groundwater, even existing groundwater, can move contaminants from site to site. So that is definitely a concern in any industrial neighborhood or area, particularly heavy industry that's adjacent to coastlines. This study did not particularly call out or cite or do any analysis of particular parcel contamination. And in terms of contamination that is mobilized by groundwater, it's only very particular types of contaminants. So we would really need a kind of different set of experts to analyze the potential risk there.
Thank you, Commissioner Stevens. Commissioner Roche.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, everyone, for the report. It was so impressive and, so much more beyond anything I am versed in. So so forgive me if my questions are a little more simple, but because it is, just how well thought out it was and sort of looking at the different alternatives. And my questions are definitely along the line of what Commissioner Goldstein or Commissioner Ali Sullivan brought up, this idea that if one area of a water, of the bay sort of, does this awesome job of putting up levees and other people don't do that, or they put up something worse, like seawalls or something like that, then the water just keeps getting flushed down the bay. And if the bay and this, further down towards San Jose doesn't do anything, are we just pushing our problem off on everybody else? And I think of like the Venice seawall that they're experimenting with, you put up something like that and that water has to go somewhere. So I was thinking kind of along the lines what Commissioner Goldstein said, that if we do nothing, what does that look like? If we accept climate change, we accept that the seas are going to rise, what would the cost be to pay for relocations, to stop building in certain areas? And I'm not necessarily advocating that, but it sounds like that's kind of a to be sort of looked at later idea, right? Is that right? But also just, just the further sort of, further in the idea that we need to work together for the whole bay so that what we do really helps us and doesn't, and because someone else doesn't do something, what all this money that we've put in to maintain our coastline isn't all for naught. So I guess what I'm wondering is there a bay wide? Is that, because I think of the peninsula, they're building right on the coastline right there when you got Facebook right there where the water is. And are they building for that? And, I don't know, I'm just wondering what the overall, what the whole bay looks like right now with these plans.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll try to get to a couple of your points there, but I brought up this map because I think this set of assumptions was really important for our team. And it took kind of quite a while and a lot of stakeholder conversation to get here. And our plan is really built on this set of assumptions that these assets, particularly the assets shown in purple, stay in place, that don't relocate and don't move. I will say, as time changes, people's assumptions and priorities change as well, right? So I think these are incredibly reasonable assumptions for our near-term solutions and exactly what we should be working for to protect our communities. As sea levels rise, as climate change impacts become more present, might a different set of assumptions emerge over time that it may be possible at moments to retreat from the shoreline or relocate certain assets that were not possible to think about relocating today? I think that's certainly the case and certainly something that we would advocate be part of a continued conversation about climate change. And I think as part of our planning and policy recommendations section to keep talking about bigger picture ideas that could help kind of shift the thinking. However, we're also trying to plan for the conditions we have today and that we can anticipate in the near term. And in the near term, it is quite possible to build resilient buildings in and around the water's edge. Many cities are doing this. So we're Escape is based in New York City, which was hit by Hurricane Sandy, and have learned a lot, really adapted and totally transformed our building code to require much more aggressive levels of flood protection at the private level. And it does mean that buildings that have been more recently built close to the water's edge are much more resilient to sea level rise and to flood impacts. They have their mechanical systems lifted out of the 500-year floodplain in some cases. They have flood protection solutions that extend and help protect adjacent critical infrastructure assets. They also simply has base flood elevations with a very generous freeboard built into them. So there's a lot of wiggle room there, which is something that's also important. This change only really happens incrementally, right? No one waves a magic wand and all the buildings adapt or, pop up in space. It really happens through very concerted efforts and focused zoning and building code modifications and updates. And many cities are beginning to do this. And if anyone's interested in talking to some of the cities or consultants that are helping cities do this, and certainly put you in touch with our colleagues at Arcadis who are working on a couple of projects relating to updating and adapting building codes and zoning codes for sea level rise.
All right, thank you.
If I could add to Gina's response.
Thanks.
Eric Pearson, Environmental Services Manager for the city. I just want to say that in terms of a regional plan, we are part of a working group that's been convened by BCDC, the Bay Conservation and Development Commission, and they're currently putting together a plan called Bay Adapt. And so they're looking at trying to improve regional coordination and identifying all the different gaps in terms of funding and technical assistance that local jurisdictions might need.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and I was also sort of along the same lines of coordination. The approach to 92, it is pretty low, like right around where the interpretive center is. And are they part of these discussions? And if they're going, and will there be opportunities to collaborate if they're going to spend some money to raise that approach? What does that do to our plan going forward?
Yeah, we had many conversations with Caltrans, who were the funder of the study, or part funder of the study, so a very important stakeholder for the group. And what we determined was that there are many different ways that San Mateo Bridge approach could begin to adapt over time, maybe through elevation, maybe through a causeway, maybe through other hybrid techniques of doing kind of one lane at a time. Some of those are in the adaptation strategies section of the report. So if you're curious at looking at them, they're included in that chapter. They were very interested in integrating into the final recommendations the potential for a causeway to allow for that water flow back and forth between the ecosystem types there.
All right, thank you. And thank you so much for all this. It's a lot of reading and really interesting. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Roche. I appreciate this plan. I found it to be very comprehensive, and I appreciated the pictures in it too, because it made it not such a hard read when I saw how many pages it was. I thought it was, it had a good balanced approach between, managing the, kind of what the built design is, the policies and the programs that were all a part of this plan. I thought it was you guys offered a really strong approach in balancing risk reduction with the ecological enhancements to really protect the shoreline and, preserve wildlife. Because I was thinking about that too, like all the wildlife that was living there. And then, the balance between sort of the built and the ecosystem enhancements I thought were really impressive. I also liked, how strong the regional collaboration was. I was impressed with that, and how deeply involved the community stakeholders were. But when I was thinking about kind of some of the programs and policies, one of them is around developing a technical support and education kind of to help the industrial businesses understand risk from sea level rise and develop mitigation approaches. I was just wondering if that could potentially be expand it beyond just, the businesses to perhaps like to what Commissioner Andrews was saying and a few other commissioners were saying, maybe to some of the residents there too, so they have a better understanding of, the impacts and the risk associated with sea level rise and the proximity that they are to the shoreline. And they may, like to the point you had also made, Gina, they may not even realize that because they're, a mile or two in.
I completely agree with that point.
So I'm just wondering if, since we're looking at it sort of from that policy and program perspective, if that might be a point of consideration for expanding. And then also, I really appreciate kind of the long-term strategic view of this plan. But, things change so quickly, as one of my fellow commissioners said, and are impacted by all of these other natural events that we're starting to see, become compounding events. So how often would this plan be updated, or is it like a living type plan, or it's not a one and done type plan, right?
Well, Eric, maybe you can speak on that, because that really is up to HASPA.
Yeah, and we are starting to think a lot about what are we going to do once this plan is in place. I think, the projects that have been identified as the short-term projects, we're going to be focusing on those and probably doing more detailed studies on some of those areas. But as far as a comprehensive plan like this one, I would expect that maybe we would look at it again in about 10 years. That's just a guess, but I'd say in the meantime, there will be a lot of I think, smaller, more focused studies.
Got it. Thank you. And then the other thing that, I was thinking is, Gina, you had mentioned some really sort of bold measures or I would say ways of dealing with and, adapting to and managing the effects of climate change, which includes, managed retreat, and then, and incentivizing that. And I know that seems a little, wild, but I know it's been successful in, other communities. So is that something that, we would think about over time as this plan comes up for revision again? Because I really don't think it's as radical as maybe what some of us might think it is.
Yeah, I mean, managed retreat is happening in my neighboring borough in Staten Island today. Like, there are properties that have experienced repeat damage from major coastal hurricanes, and once that occurs a couple of times, there's great incentive for landowners to voluntarily elect to participate in managed retreat programs. It is certainly, I think, becoming an option that's being looked at more seriously by municipalities and agencies. I think we're not quite at the point yet where that's happening along the Hayward shoreline or as much in the Bay Area, because there aren't those kind of similar level of extreme events that have occurred that cause so much devastation at one particular moment. As hurricanes don't really happen in the same way, though there are king tides, there are extreme coastal storms, there are still event-based, flood occurrences. I think over time, these conversations will need to happen and become part of the dialogue. So, we've really focused on proposing early term and short term implementation projects that are compatible with a number and a variety of different future alternatives. We're not trying to simply build one puzzle that can only lock in together in one specific way. A lot of the proposals around interim levies kind of understand that interim moves might be made, but there then needs to be a period of assessment and planning and maybe rethinking some of the work. So some of our interim levies might be built, and then it makes sense to raise them to the elevation that we originally proposed. Some it might make sense to realign them based upon how the science evolves with climate change within the next 5 or 10 years. The reality is we're working in a very rapidly changing world, and it's very difficult to predict what should be done within a 50-year time frame, but it's also very important to take a stab at it and put a proposal out there and start to organize around a direction. And I think that speaks to the last goal of this project that I presented in the beginning, which is really about building capacity for planning for climate change in the future. So I think this plan is just a beginning and a starting point for that, and we hope it can help unlock many future diverse conversations.
Sounds good. Thank you for that. I thought the goals that were in the plan were also, well done and very thoughtful. One of the things that, and I know that we've talked about many mitigation measures, but, it's like, at some point we're just going to have to make a decision to stop building in this area, because otherwise we're going to continue to be having to do these mitigation measures when we know that this is a risky area to be doing stuff. And, as commissioners and as policymakers, we're putting more and more stuff in that industrial area, and we're trying to develop that, right? And that is just something that we need to really make sure that we're thinking through and that we're making sure that as businesses are moving in and as things are being built in that area, that these considerations are being put in place. And then
I would just add to that the business district doesn't occur independent from the infrastructure around it too. So there's the Hayward wastewater treatment plant, which also needs protection. And so as much kind of symbiosis between these different elements that can be achieved with this plan, that is the goal. Yeah. But also, each of those, like Orloma and Hayward, they might have long lifetimes, but they do have a lifetime. So that might be a planning horizon to think about in the future.
Yes, very, very well stated. Thank you for that insight. The other thing that I was thinking is, one of the commissioners had mentioned, the consequences of not doing, and not necessarily saying let's scare people, but just putting some real public education out there about the underlying importance of doing this. And perhaps part of that education is helping people understand the impact of not doing it. Or the impacts that will inevitably occur if we don't prioritize this as important as we're prioritizing, other things in the city. And then I appreciate the comment around, how do we make sure that this accounts for our most vulnerable, and how do we put policies in place to really, incentivize and help those that maybe can't help themselves, so that we're not in a position where the most vulnerable are left behind and other people are making their way through. But again, very good job. Thank you for listening to all of our questions and comments. But I think you heard from all of us that we're very, impressed with this plan and how strong it is, how integrated it is, comprehensive it is, and, how collaboratively this plan has been developed. So thank you all.
Thank you
for being with us this evening. Anything else from city staff, or Gina, did you want to add anything else on this topic before we move on?
No, it's been a pleasure to work with this team, so thank you.
Thank you for being here tonight. Okay. Very important topic, and thank you everyone for that. We will move on to our next topic of the evening. My agenda here, and it's all turned upside down, but it is a proposed cannabis microbusiness, again, with cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, delivery, and ancillary support storefront retail activities located at 25571 Clawwitter Road and 3329 and 3363 Enterprise Road. This applicant is requiring approval of a conditional use permit. So with that, we will go over to city staff for our staff report this evening.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chair. I'm going to share my screen. Just give me a second. And let's go full screen. Does everybody see a slideshow in front of them? Okay, great. Yes. Good evening, commissioners. Elizabeth Blanton, Associate Planner. For this item, we'll be reviewing a conditional use permit to allow a cannabis microbusiness for Precision Apothecary, which is now doing business as Jubilife. The microbusiness will have cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, delivery, and ancillary storefront retail activities, which we'll go through over the course of this presentation. The proposed project is located at the corner of Clawwitter Road and Enterprise Avenue, which is indicated by the red star on this map. And as you can see, the project site is located in the heart of the industrial area, just north of Highway 92 and a line. The proposed business will operate out of 2 tenant spaces located on the same property. The main spaces will be at 25571 Clawwitter Road and 3329 Enterprise Avenue, which is indicated by the large red square in the center of this aerial image. And the existing property here features a single-story industrial building as well as an existing greenhouse, which is good for the cultivation aspect. In addition, the proposed business would also occupy a second tenant space again on this property, which is shown in that smaller red rectangle. The total existing area of all tenant spaces to be occupied by the applicant is just over 32,000 square feet. And the general plan land use designation of this site is industrial corridor, and the zoning district is general industrial. And as I'm sure you know by now, cannabis businesses with manufacturing and cultivation are allowed in the IG zoning district with the approval of a conditional use permit. The existing buildings on site, which you can see here, the top image is taken from the perspective of Clawwater, while the bottom image is taken from Enterprise Avenue. It's a simple one-story industrial buildings, and the property does have an adjacent parking lot, which you can't see, but it would be just to the right of the top image. The peaked roofs that you see in the lower image are the existing greenhouses that will be totally rebuilt to house the microbusiness's cultivation operation. The surrounding area also features a lot of 1- and 2-story industrial buildings that house a range of industrial uses, including warehousing, manufacturing, and some auto repair uses. The plans for this application are included as attachment 4 to this agenda item. And again, here on the site plan, you can see the multiple tenant spaces that will be occupied by the applicant for this proposed microbusiness. Now, the primary modification to the site plan is a small addition to the greenhouse, which you can see here outlined in that bold red. The proposed addition will increase the size of the greenhouse from just over 11,000 square feet to approximately 13,200 square feet. And in addition, site improvements will also include aesthetic enhancements to the building facades, including some modern wooden slats and metal awnings that you can see on these elevations, some new landscaping surrounding the property, and a new metal security fence. The proposed floor plan for the larger tenant space features rooms for manufacturing, research and development of products, loading, offices, and employee break areas. Cultivation will largely occur in that rebuilt and expanded greenhouse, which is on the left side of the floor plan here. And there will also be a small retail storefront that will face Clawwater Road, which will sell products directly to the public. Now, the second tenant space at 3363 Enterprise will focus primarily on the delivery and distribution aspects of the microbusiness. And specifically, as you can see here, it will house the storage for the distribution and delivery operation, as well as a packaging room, loading area, offices, and an employee break area. The business and operations plan for Jubilife is included as attachment 5 to this agenda item. And as I've mentioned earlier, this proposed microbusiness will have 5 different components: cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, delivery, and ancillary storefront retail. Now, Jubilife's core mission is to produce products that improve the quality of life for individuals who are experiencing debilitating symptoms from serious illness, such as cancer, epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, autism, chronic pain, PTSD, and others. The name Precision Apothecary comes from the fact that the company aims to provide precision cannabis, which they define as the right medicine to the right patient at the right dosage at the right time. To achieve these goals, Jubilife will manufacture a range of products, including edibles, soft gel capsules, transdermal patches, oral film stops, inhalers, and suppositories. The cannabis products that Jubilife cultivates and manufactures will then be distributed to other licensed operators through their distribution operation. They'll be delivered straight to customers via their delivery fleet, and they'll be sold on site at their small retail storefront. Jubilife will operate from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. daily, with the exception of the retail components, which, as conditioned, will operate from 9 to 9, which is consistent with other cannabis retail operations in the city. Jubilife's safety and security plan is included also as part of attachment 5. And to comply with city and state requirements, the microbusiness will have at least one on-site security guard at all times during business hours. They'll also install security cameras inside and outside of the building, as well as a new alarm system. Security camera footage will be high definition and made available to the police department when requested. Delivery and distribution vehicles will be equipped with lock boxes to ensure the safety of the company's drivers. All vehicle loading and unloading will occur within the secured interior of the buildings on site in a couple different locations. In addition to all the safety and security plan, Jubilife has also provided an odor mitigation plan, which provides a three-prong approach to prevent any cannabis odors from escaping outside of the buildings. So this will include a series of carbon filters, a negative air pressure exhaust system that basically ensures that air does not seep out of the building through any cracks or gaps, and a high-pressure fog system that utilizes a mix of essential oils to neutralize odor. Attachment 7 to the agenda, this agenda item this evening, is Jubilife's sustainability plan, which highlights the sustainability measures that the company will employ. This notably includes a reverse osmosis water system that is significantly more efficient than industry standard for this type of system. And also the fact that they're actually using a greenhouse, so they can make use of the natural daylight from the greenhouse, which will reduce the need for the amount of artificial light. In response to this application, staff has received comments from 2 nearby businesses. The comments received included concerns about the traffic and type of clientele that might be generated by this facility, a perceived lack of parking, and the state of the existing landscaping on site, which, as I mentioned earlier, will be replaced by the applicant. In addition, one of the businesses that is operating out of a different tenant space on the property did express concerns about the proposed greenhouse extension, as it would reduce the amount of space between the existing buildings on site. This other business is informally using the space between the buildings to park and store vehicles related to their auto repair business, but parking in this area is actually not permitted by the approved site plan for the property. In response to these comments received, the applicant sent out a flyer to all neighbors within 300 feet of the site. They invited them to come to the property and have a discussion about any of the concerns that neighbors might be having about this proposed project. While they held this meeting, no neighbors elected to attend. As detailed in the staff report and the findings for this item, the application is consistent with the requirements, goals, and policies of the general plan, and this includes supporting the plan's goals and policies around attracting emerging sectors and supporting entrepreneurship. So with that, staff's recommendation this evening is that the Planning Commission approve the conditional use permit for the proposed cannabis microbusiness to allow cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, delivery, and ancillary retail activities based on the required findings and subject to the conditions of approval. And this includes the additional conditions of approval from the fire department that were finalized this afternoon and circulated to the commission earlier this evening. The newly added conditions are shown on red text on pages 20 through 22 of attachment 3. Now, this formally concludes my presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions that the commission may have. And in addition, the applicant has also prepared a short presentation that they would like to make to the commission.
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. Always very concise. Let's hear from the applicant, and then we will see if the commissioners have any questions before we go to public comment.
Okay, great. Let me pull up the applicant's presentation. Here we go. And Doug, are you on the line?
I am. Hello, commissioners, and Elizabeth, thank you for that great overview. Are you all able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Would you mind introducing yourself before you get started, and then you can jump right in?
Sure. My name's Doug Klopek. I'm officially the chief janitor at I'm the CEO, founder, and chairman of the board of Jubilife. As a little bit of background, and we'll jump into this slide in just a second. I've commercially ran and done nothing for my professional career, but operate cannabis-related businesses for the last little over 11 years. As you'll see in some of the slides, I think I've started probably 10 or 12 corporations in the last 11 years, including the very first licensed manufacturing center ever permitted in the state of California. So I truly own permit number 1 for the state of California. I appreciate you giving us the time to go through these slides here. One thing that I really wanted to impress, and I'll try to move through this quickly here, is that Juva is not just a cannabis company. Juva is actually much more of a life science company that happens to focus on cannabis currently. My company, our mission is to help people feel better and to help people understand what type of cannabis, how cannabis, and if cannabis can help them. As a little bit of background, I've raised a little over $24 million for my company in the last 20 months. Specifically in the last 12 months, we've raised 19 million in the last 12 months. I have a little over 5,000 investors of our company. We will be doing our Canadian IPO November 17th. We were approved by FINRA and the SEC and the U.S. Securities Commission 2 days ago to trade under the symbol JUVA for our U.S. listing, which will go public sometime in middle of November. And we're also going public in Germany, November 23rd. I say all that because we have a breadth of knowledge and depth of industry. And this is much more than a cannabis company. We are much more of a life science company. Elizabeth, if you don't mind going to the next slide. As you can see, the board and my medical advisory and my company structure is based, 1, through diversity, and 2, through medical knowledge. The medical board that sits as my representation to the medical community and the researchers at large represented are made up of the former head of the U.S. Breast Surgeon Society of America that represents over 4,000 breast surgeons. Dr. Rakesh Patel is the chief resident oncologist for Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Gatos. Dr. Guy Miller is a new development advisor for Johnson & Johnson. Mary Kay Hardwick has had over 20 years of writing patient research registries, specifically around pharmaceutical and oncology and pain management. And that really speaks to what our company actually is. Cannabis happens to be the product that we are able to revenue stream, and I have a great depth of knowledge, and my team does. However, we've bridged the gap between science, cannabis, and technology, and are creating what we believe is a very new and informative type of way of researching alternative pharmaceutical products. Could you move to the next slide, please? Here's just a few, of some of our licenses. Currently, we have retail operations in Redwood City. We gained 2 of the 6 licenses in the city of Redwood City. We have an operational non-storefront retail in Stockton. We have a 32,000 square foot cultivation facility for very high grade indoor cultivation in Stockton, which we expect to have our TCO issued next Thursday. We also have distribution in Stockton with a separate building we've yet to develop. And then we list a handful of others. We've owned 2 licensed facilities in Redwood, or in 2 of the 16 retail dispensaries in the city of San Jose. And as I mentioned, the first manufacturing license out of the city of Berkeley in 2016, and a number of other facilities. Do you mind going to the next slide, Elizabeth? Juva is made up of 6 different divisions. We have our cultivation, distribution, manufacturing, retail, research, and delivery. Do you mind the next slide? Just to give a little point of reference, usually in our cannabis industry, we are shoved into dilapidated, ugly industrial buildings that nobody really wants you next to them as their neighbor, and we do our best to make it as beautiful as possible. What you see is an example of that. This is our current Hayward facility. The photo on the left was when we took over the facility. The photo on the right is what it looks like today. We've spent a little over $9 million on this facility over the last 20 months of development. And you see some representations of, GMP style manufacturing, our water control rooms and our irrigation systems, which is replicated in each of our facilities, just to give you an idea of the caliber of work that we intend to do in Hayward as well. Do you mind going to the next facility? This is actually the very first licensed cannabis manufacturing center ever licensed in the state of California out of Berkeley in 2016. Again, just to show some references of the level of work and the caliber that we bring to the industry. This was one of our extraction facilities and some of the PPE equipment that we voluntarily imposed to ensure employee safety. Do you mind going to the next slide, please? Oh, sorry, I got my little 2-year-old and 6-year-old getting ready to go to bed. Can you shut the door, please, honey? Okay. Okay, good night, honey. Shut the door, please. Sorry. Some of you may or may not know this building. This is our existing building on the corner of Cloudwater and Enterprise, and you may have seen this in Elizabeth's slide, but if you don't mind going to the next one, please. This is the artistic rendering of what we plan to do to the building. We have a beautiful employee lounge area, along with the beautification of the corner storefront there. I think that might be our last slide. Is there one more, Elizabeth, or is that it?
That's it.
Okay. All right, so that concludes the presentation slide. Forgive the background. I got 2 kids not wanting to go to bed right now, but here we are on Zoom. So I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone may have any questions about our business operation, history, or use coming up.
Sounds good. Thank you for that, Doug. All right, commissioners, do any commissioners have questions for city staff or Doug before we go to public comments? And then we'll come back for commissioner comments. Questions, please raise your hand and I will call on the speakers in which the order your hand is raised. So leading us off is going to be Commissioner Goldstein.
Well, I'm actually surprised I made it first. I was really hoping that Commissioner Andrews was going to go first because, quite frankly, I love the questions that she brings. And if I may, with some apology, Commissioner Andrews, I'm going to ask some of your questions, which I have. I promise I'm going to take on those questions in the future. I'm assuming that you are going to get elected to City Council, and just want you to know that the history and the heritage and the passion that you have here will be well represented. So I was looking through the conditions of approval and I didn't see anything in there about hiring preferences for people that are local residents. I didn't see anything in there about a hiring plan for people that are, coming out of penitentiary institutions. And I'm just wondering, have you discussed those with our planner, Elizabeth Blanton, or are those things that you naturally do as part of your business enterprise anyway? If you don't mind, can you comment on that, please?
Yes, absolutely. I didn't mute. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we've only had 26 months of working on this project to hash out all of the details. So the short 24-page condition that you saw is only representative of a snapshot of the 457-page application packet that was actually submitted. So yeah, we have vetted that very in depth. I think there's a twofold answer that specifically addresses that piece. Every city that we work in, and we have projects in multiple cities, we look at local hire. So I look to hire local contractors, local GCs, local laborers, local union. In some cases, our title job in Stockton is a complete union job, not that we are necessarily intent on using union, but it happened to work that way. So we're a 80% union job in the city of Stockton. In terms of the community benefit and local hire is always our preference. We don't necessarily differentiate between any type of social status in terms of our local hire, but local hire is always our intention and our preference. We assemble very qualified, very specific teams for very highly skilled, targeted jobs. If those are able to be acquired and hired through local, then that is absolutely our preference. In terms of community benefit, because I believe that was a portion of what you touched on. This is where I think I may slightly differ in terms of a community, in terms of a business owner for community benefit, should I be truly honest. many cities, and this comes up in every city, many cities look simply at community benefit of, well, what's the tax percentage or what's the dollar amount that someone's going to give to whatever said charity happens to be on the list or of sponsored projects. And I look at it slightly different. I look at community benefit as what we can do to actually benefit our true community, not necessarily what's the dollar amount that we can achieve. And we started this, 11 years ago when I opened my very first dispensary in the city of San Jose. At that dispensary, voluntarily, completely on our own, we pulled over 10,000 pounds of trash out of the creek, which was adjacent to my property, just because it was the right thing to do. We donated over 60,000 pounds of food collectively to over about six different charity drives, because it actually had an actual impact. It wasn't just some money going to something. We held two blood drives that saved over 300 people's lives with the amount of blood that we donated collectively directly from our organization. We raised over $17,000 in funds to the Leukemia Lymphoma Society because of our active participation, actually running the marathons and actually raising the money for the organization. I say those things because my company, Juva, is actually not necessarily a cannabis company. While we're being permitted as a cannabis company, we are a much more of a life science company, employing the tools of biology and medicine to create natural products to change humans' health and empower humans to be better agents of their health. No one is doing the actual science. We were approved 2 weeks ago by the Western IRB. That's an independent review board. It's a different version, but in essence, the validity of the outcome of the registry is like a FDA approved multi-phase preclinical that gives you phase 2A preclinical data. We were approved 2 weeks ago for our 2,000 patient registry, and we can start onboarding patients. The data from that will actually tell real science and real people what cannabis works for what patients at what rate with what genetic or predisposed issues. So I look at our community benefit plan as a way to truly benefit the community that is around us, because those will be the people who will be enrolling in our registries, and we can actually make a difference on the health of people. And I think that becomes one of our biggest community benefits that we can bring to the city of Hayward.
Very good. Well, I admire your vision and your goals. Clearly you're bringing history and passion to the task in a whole new way. I applaud that. One more question though. We like to see our public art on new buildings. And since you're in the process of doing some work on your building anyway, would you entertain the idea of having a local artist apply some art, some public art to your building?
Not really. Sorry. I know that's great for retail businesses. That's great for downtown locations. And I think someone planning would really love that to happen. I think that incurs two things. It's a detraction from the overall aesthetic value that we are lending to the neighborhood. I think it would be a detraction from the brand that we are creating and the elevated level of our brand, Juva, from having some local artwork. So while I appreciate the recommendation, it's not something that I would voluntarily do or wish to do. And I think it would be a detriment to the overall aesthetic value of our project and our plan.
Okay, I respectfully disagree. But moving on, in the news lately, there's been a number of drivers that have been robbed at gunpoint. And there's also been Uber and Lyft drivers who've had their cars stolen, Uber Eats and I think DoorDash and maybe some other brands of food delivery. And I'm just wondering what the potential consequences are of your delivery drivers, not only carrying your products and cash, but potentially being vulnerable while they're doing deliveries, and what steps you're taking to mitigate that risk to your drivers.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. security is first and foremost at each of our locations. The way that we load cars, how we send drivers out, how we plan drivers' routes, the surveillance systems. We actually have 3 separate GPS systems. We have multiple security cameras following each of those drivers. I'll give you a slight example where collaborative work has really, really benefited. The days from 11 years ago when we used to kick undercover police officers out who were trying to bust the bad dispensaries are so far removed to the days now when in the city of Stockton, if we have a delivery in an area that seems maybe questionable, we are actually able to call the police department. They'll do a vetting on the address to ensure that we do not have a potential history of some negative effects at that potential address. Sorry, I got my little guys over here. In addition to that, we are only able to take as best of security protocols as are physically possible now. So that limits the amount of cash and product that any driver has. We accept and use probably 60+% are cashless payment transactions. So our drivers actually don't carry much cash almost ever. Our drivers typically are doing one drive out, one drive back. As routes get busier, they'll have small routes, so they keep a minimal amount of cash. Our product is locked and affixed to the actual car itself. Everything is unmarked. There's no signage on any of the cars. There's no visible markings on the vehicles that give any indication or clue. That said, the best laid plans are there's always a criminal who's looking to have some way to circumvent those. So we do our best to mitigate, and we knock on wood, we have never had an issue. And if there ever is an issue, then we will actively address it as best as possible with all security measures taken.
I'll just add to, as you might have noticed when you were reviewing the conditions of approval, there are a number that are specifically directed at the operation of the delivery component of the business. That was very carefully vetted by our police department. They added a number of conditions that they've added to other delivery operations in Hayward, hopefully to ensure safety. And again, in Hayward, we'll have the opportunity to review how things are going every year. And if we need to require additional security measures, we'll have the ability to do that.
Yeah, good, very good. Excellent answers. And again, glad to hear your vision is encompassing the security of your drivers. Just one last thing. I have to say, I applaud you for keeping your composure while your kids are screaming in the background. It's a tough thing to do. You're being a great dad and a great businessman. So I applaud you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. All right, thank you, Commissioner Andrews.
Yes, I actually have a 20-month-old, so I sympathize with you. So mine is quiet right now, but I definitely sympathize. I also didn't recognize you in the slide because you had like a totally different look. I was looking for you on the slide, so I thought that was was interesting. I did want to ask those questions that Commissioner Goldstein asked, but thank you. I think that shows a lot of progress and growth, and I'm so happy you asked the question about social equity and local hire. So I didn't quite hear the answer that I was anticipating on hearing, which was, are you interested in entering a particular equity program? Because local hire is different than a social equity program that it focuses on formerly incarcerated individuals who are doing the same exact thing that you're doing with this business.
I have zero issue. About that. We have zero issue, and for that matter, always try to hire local. And if there's a opportunity to have the right candidate that fits the right job description. So I am a firm believer that there's the right person for the right seat on the bus. Sometimes you have to stop the bus, or sometimes you have to switch seats on the bus. but we look for the right person in the right seat on the bus. If that right person happens to come from a social equity program or through a pool through social equity, we're absolutely completely open and would look to hire from that pool.
Okay, great.
At the end of the day, I just want to be real. I am not interested in hiring somebody because of a social or economic status as much as I'm interested in hiring the right person to do the right job, irrelevant of social or economic status. But if those two things coincide to be the right person, 100% on board for that.
Okay, great. So the other question I have in relation to public art, I actually wasn't going to ask specifically about having a public art piece, but more of just interested in the color choices that were made and just wanted to hear a little bit more about the design.
Sure. Elizabeth, if you don't mind going back to, there you go.
Yep.
So this is in part a kind of more simplistic view of what our design elements are, but in essence, you have a greenhouse that's there. We try to tie in the look and the cladding of the fence wall with the building, along with the coloring of the greenhouses to kind of mute the greenhouses so they don't stand out. They kind of stand out a bit now, and that was one of the requests also from PD. Elizabeth, if you don't mind going back to my Stockton facility, I think it's 1 or 2 pages up on my presentation.
No problem. Give me a second. I'm gonna switch.
And the reason I was asking to bring these up is you'll see a bit of continuity between interior layout and kind of visual aesthetics. Our company, if you couldn't tell, is the green accent. It's a pretty specific green to our company. Yeah. The look of how the Stockton facility looks here, which uses the natural wood tones, wood bricking, accent colors for some of the awnings. This was a little specific here because the city of Stockton wanted to have an accent color on one of the awning components, but it's fairly indicative of what we try to do with our facilities to give a really nice kind of modern but somewhat neutral tone and effect. So to the point, Elizabeth, if you're able to go to the slide that has our building on it, the Hayward facility, I think it's the very last slide here. There you go. That's a pretty accurate art. We have 2 different elevation views. The view on the bottom left corner here shows the actual kind of top-down elevation view with landscaping and ADA access. The one on the top has a little bit of an architectural rendering that kind of ties in the slatted fence line that'll go around that fence line. If you look at the bottom right-hand corner, that fence line is that same fence that ties in for the indoor-outdoor employee break area. So that's pretty representative of what we intended the facility to look like. The building would be some version of an off-white, somewhat represented in this picture, maybe not to the exact, and some versions of a grayish kind of tones. The reason why, if you look at the aesthetics of this building, go slap a mural, no disrespect, but to put a mural on the building, I think would detract from the clean architectural lines and also from us being an actual life science company and being more of just a retail facility, even though we do have a small retail component of our business.
No, and we definitely don't only request murals, so I don't want to give that impression. We have had some businesses who just put an accent wall similar to what Stockton has done. And it's not just because we like art, we love art, but we do it to protect the businesses that come here to detract graffiti and for maintenance. So I just would, I actually like the clean look. I like the wood slats. I do feel that is bringing a dimension, another level there to an industrial building. So I appreciate that accent that you've added. It's just something to consider that it might be a maintenance issue for you later on, but I'm sure you'll be able to manage that. And then my question is for staff. I'm a little confused on the retail component. Can you explain? Because I thought we were focusing, I thought City Council wanted retail to be downtown, and this is in the industrial area. And I'm a little confused by the micro business here that is being proposed.
That's a good question. I think this is our first I process a lot of the cannabis applications, but I don't process all of them. I think this is our first micro business that we're taking to the commission that includes a storefront retail component that is allowed per our code. There are a lot of restrictions on the storefront retail that can be part of a micro business that's not in our, kind of downtown dispensary area. One, the size of it is limited, so it has to be a pretty small component of the site. And two, they can only sell products that are developed on site. So they're not going to have like the breadth of products that you would see at a retail dispensary downtown. So it's a much smaller operation, but it is a storefront retail component where someone could come and purchase product. And that's consistent with micro businesses across the state.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that, because I was really confused when I was reading the application. So I think those were all my questions for now. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Ali Sullivan.
Quite a few questions here. I'll just go down my list here. The majority of them I think will be directed towards city staff, a couple for the applicant. First question here. So it states in attachment 1, as far as zoning ordinances, that the project site is located within the general industrial zoning district. I believe there was also a reference to an innovation corridor that this site sits in. In my mind, innovation corridor is something different. Can you tell me how this facility would be consistent with that type of zoning?
Sure. When the general plan was adopted, the most recent general plan was adopted by the city back in 2014, the vision for the industrial area, and the industrial area is obviously a huge part of Hayward's economy. It's, in many ways, the economic engine of the city. But in the past, it's had a lot of warehousing and manufacturing uses, very traditional industrial uses. So the general plan envisioned still allowing those types of uses to occur in Hayward, but to also diversify and modernize the industrial area to allow more of R&D type uses, custom manufacturing, things that are not always on the heavier side of the industrial uses that we have traditionally seen in the city, but kind of a wider range of things that maybe in some ways are more like offices instead of like a traditional warehouse. So this facility in particular fits in there. As you saw, and I can go back, there are a number of general plan goals and policies about growing emerging businesses and sectors. Cannabis is obviously something that has been somewhat recently legalized in California. So we're just getting our first wave of cannabis businesses in the city. This one in particular is fairly innovative, again, as Doug was explaining, because they really take an interest in R&D and developing cannabis products that can really assist people that are having some medical issues that they're not able or they don't want to solve with other solutions. So that's kind of how this fits into what was envisioned by the general plan for that innovation corridor. Our recent industrial district zoning code update also was really getting at diversifying our industrial districts to allow for a wider range of uses. Does that generally answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Might not agree with it, but it answers the question.
Okay.
Let's see. On attachment 3, the conditions of approval, number 11, the applicant shall provide a detailed community benefits plan program and coordinate implementation of that program with city staff within 6 months from permit approval. It seems a little counterintuitive to me that we approve the application. After it's been approved, the applicant comes up with what that community benefit would be. I would think that you'd want to know, and I would like to know what that community benefit plan looks like before we approve the conditional use permit.
Yeah, this is a standard condition of approval for all cannabis businesses.
Right.
As you likely know, we've somewhat changed course or changed focus for the community benefits. Our first round of cannabis applicants, and Jeremy can speak to this better than I can probably, but our first round of cannabis applicants all had to submit a very robust community benefits plan. Since then, council has adopted a tax increase that will tax cannabis an extra percentage, which will then go towards community benefits. As a result, as Doug said, the cannabis applicants that have come in afterwards still have community benefit programs per our ordinance. They still need to tell us what those components are and stick to what they're saying in their plans. But the way that we're asking for that is a little less detailed because of this tax component that's now in place.
Actually, this is Mike Vigilio from the City Attorney's Office. On that 1% tax increase, I just want to make it clear that the cannabis tax is a general tax, and it's available for all municipal purposes. And the 1% increase can be used for any municipal purpose. It may be used to go to court to go towards community benefits. That's at the discretion of the council as part of the budget process. So I just wanted to make that clarification that 1% was not specifically meant to fund community benefits programs.
I also just wanted to kind of weigh in here briefly that, the community benefits component was required of all cannabis applicants when we issued the initial RFP back in 2017. Mm-hmm. And so all of the applicants that you'll see coming forward that you saw last week, or excuse me, 2 weeks ago, and that you'll see any applicants moving forward, will have that standard condition. And that condition basically states that whatever the applicant committed to as part of the community benefits program. In some cases, it was just, working with with an education component to partner with the neighboring schools to make sure that, kids are educated about drug awareness and things like that. So it's not always a monetary contribution related to community benefits, but because it was because all of these applicants that you see coming to the commission were actually selected and scored and ranked comprehensively, and community benefits was one of those components. We are obligating them at this stage to continue to fulfill, continue with what they were originally have committed themselves to. And so, and as a way to make sure that happens, it's their obligation to work with city. It's not necessarily the planning division or the planning commission that oversees that community benefits component, but it is something that was enshrined with their original business proposal that they submitted in response to our RFP back in 2017. Okay, thanks. As Commissioner Andrews mentioned, the retail component of this was very surprising to me, and so a couple things there. First off, it seems very out of place to have retail in this part of town. I'm relatively familiar with it. After hours, there is nothing going on there. And so to have retail that's operating at 9 p.m., aside from being out of place, seems like it could potentially become there could be public nuisance concerns or there could be safety concerns on dark, quiet streets. And so I'm curious if, seeing as this facility would be outside of the central business district, if the requirement for 9 to 9 still would exist for a micro retail outlet, or if those hours can be constrained.
Yeah, the 9 to 9 condition came from our police department. They felt that was appropriate based on the security measures that were in place on site, the security guard, all of the cameras, all of the security fencing and equipment. But that is something we as the city do have the ability to alter those hours. If we think different hours would be appropriate, that is something that we could condition as part of the project. I'll also note, as the commission is aware, there are some significant redevelopment projects being proposed. Both are kind of in the application process right now at the planning division across the street. The Berkeley Farm site is immediately across the street from this property. We just received an application for that. And then the old former Gillig bus manufacturing facility that's also being redeveloped is just south of the Berkeley Farms property. So that's a lot of redevelopment, a lot of new buildings, a new investment that's going into this area that will somewhat change the character of at least this particular stretch of Clawwater.
So I will, that makes sense. I'll reiterate that I do have some concerns with those hours, and I don't know what the potential, if that's something that we can discuss or if it's something that City Council should discuss, but do have some concerns there. You mentioned security. The application specifies one security guard only during business hours. That I'm not a security expert, but I'm surprised that there's only a requirement for one security guard on a very large site that goes over 2 streets and includes multiple buildings, and only during business hours. In addition, I have concerns around the security component of the greenhouses that are, it appears that they are right adjacent to the sidewalk. And so if there's no security after hours, those greenhouses appear to abut right up to the property line. And so I'm curious why it was only a requirement for one security guard.
I can again say that is a standard condition of approval that we require of all businesses. In Jubilife's application, they mentioned that likely there will be multiple security guards at different times, depending on what phase of operations they're in. Doug, you can feel free to jump in on that. But the greenhouse is one of the reasons that they're being totally rebuilt. One is to be up to current codes, but 2 is to make sure that they're fully secure, because as you notice, the existing greenhouses would not be a safe place to house a cultivation operation of this size. Yep. So increasing the security of that greenhouse, making sure the fencing is tall. There is a space between the fencing and the greenhouse, and the building itself is secure and alarmed and has security cameras and all of that. But Doug, I don't know if you want to add anything about security.
Yeah, I'd like to add some there. So a couple things. We were limited to only having an 8-foot high security fence. I'd be perfectly fine installing a 10-foot high security fence. Our security fence is a 3/4 inch extra heavy duty wrought iron security fence with steel picket. It's decorative, it's black, it looks beautiful, but it also serves the purpose. It has a cladding over it so that you will not be able to see through the fencing. When you're on the greenhouse side, that cladding will match with the greenhouses. And I believe from public right away, there's a 17 or 16 foot setback to the greenhouses. The separation between the fence and the greenhouses, I'm doing this by memory, is like 14 feet or something of that nature. So there is a good bit of setback from the fence to the greenhouse, and then there's a setback from what would have been public right of way. However, instead of, and again for security measures, installing public access with sidewalk that currently does not exist, we actually have opted to do the landscaping. So it'd be a landscaped area that leads to a security fence with cladding that's not able to be seen through or accessed through. And then the greenhouses are, again, by memory, I think we're maybe 15 or 16 feet, 14 feet behind that fence. So that is what, through many rounds of, through 4 separate rounds of CUP submissions and a second revision of our 4th submission, landed with agreement with police and fire that was the appropriate solution.
I'll just add here again, anything that we see as an issue, we will have the ability to address during the annual review. So if we see that the security here is not sufficient and we're having calls and police is having to come out to respond to things, then we can require that additional security measures are put in place.
Okay. How many sites will the city have? Because from our last meeting, I believe it was noted that there were 4 permits for retail. Am I incorrect there?
There's
number 4.
Yeah, that's a good question. There's 3 downtown dispensaries that are allowed per our code. So we will be capped out at 3 in the downtown area. There is not a limit to the number of ancillary storefronts or retail that could be seen in micro businesses. This is the first one, I believe, that is proposed in the city, but there could be additional ones. in the future.
Okay. Doug, you note that the company's mission is medical. Your retail component, are you selling to people that only have medical marijuana cards?
No.
Okay, so
we wouldn't, because to be perfectly honest, almost no one has a medical cannabis card anymore. Medical cannabis cards were historically purchased under Prop 215 and SB 420 that needed a doctor's recommendation before 2018. Since 2018, the cumbersome nature of achieving a medical card through your doctor and through the state and the listings that are needed for the potential savings, most have opted not to. So there's a small, like, single-digit percentage of the population, whether medical or adult use, that actually have a medical card. And most who get a medical card are not getting it because they actually have an actual true medical issue. They're getting it because there's a slight tax advantage and savings, and it's worth it to them.
Okay. Revenue. So you mentioned that people like to focus on economics and the tax benefits to the city, and that's not how you like to think about it. That is how I like to think about it. I think it's very important to note what the actual tangible benefit to the city is in monetary measure. I didn't see any revenue estimates, although it was a very, very lengthy packet that you provided. Do you have any revenue estimates?
Yeah, we absolutely do. This site is actually our core site. I think the revenue estimates are much better suited by talking about the size of market and our ability to deliver to said market. Products currently on market that are being delivered and developed through the state of California are typically sold at 8 to 16 cents per milligram for unformulated cannabis products. That's a gummy bear, a chocolate, a sucker. That's the typical per price milligram. The numbers I'm going to quote to you right now are based on 5 cents per milligram, which is roughly almost half of the current spot market price at a wholesale value of cannabis. When we look at our target ailments that we are looking to have formulated products through our patient research registry, penetrating 1% of California's newly affected as of last year creates a $360 million a year revenue stream. We would need to scale up and take at least one more 30,000 square foot building to fully achieve the $360 million revenue stream at 1% of market penetration for the newly affected from last year. Specifically from this site that we're looking at, we estimate that we have a annual revenue potential of between $37 and $68 million through this particular site that we're talking about here.
Okay, so let's just call it 50 million. We said there's an additional 1% tax, 5 million. So
yeah, for 7% total.
Yeah, okay. All right. And then the last thing I'll mention, so you, in regards to art, your response caught me a little off guard there, particularly because you mentioned that art would typically be in a establishment that's retail, yet you have a retail component here and you do have a patio that you're proposing. And so I just found it a little incongruous.
Yeah, we're a life science company with an ancillary business, which is retail. We're not a retail facility with an ancillary business of life science, medical production, research, registry, delivery, distribution, packaging, and shipping through the state of California. So in my opinion, it would be a detraction from the overall aesthetic value of the building. If that becomes a condition that's mandated by the Planning Commission that I must put in order to receive our building, I'll paint some artwork. It's not what I would initially intend to do or choose to do willingly, but if that becomes a condition, then I will happily comply.
One random question here for city staff. Tree 1707, on page 13 of the attachment 3, it mentions tree 1707 as a particular call out. Is that the redwood at the corner of the street?
Yes, I believe so. There was a lot of back and forth about the patio design and the redwood and preserving and making sure that the slatting, the paving of the patio was in a way that would preserve the roots of the tree. So yes, Doug's team and our landscape architect had many conversations about making sure that we preserve that tree.
Great.
And to add, if I could add just a little bit to there, our patio was actually extended about 6 feet, 7 feet out towards the Enterprise Corridor Street area. That tree was actually inside of our fence line, which we thought was awesome to have this beautiful redwood as part of our like aesthetic value of our break room area. But the city had requested that we shrunk our employee area by about 15 or 18% to accommodate that tree being outside of our fence line.
Okay, so to clarify, the patio is for staff, not for customers?
Oh yeah, staff only. This is not a no.
Okay.
Yeah. No, this is we have an indoor outdoor. If you it's kind of hard to see on that diagram, but the pink area on that diagram currently shown on the south, the lower right corner, there's a turquoise outside and a pink inside. That pink right there is the internal break room with a roll-up door that opens, that creates an indoor-outdoor living space. So when we have tempered weather, nice weather, we're able to have a really nice outdoor patio with an inside, indoor-outdoor kind of flow. This is only employee only. I think one thing that, just because it's come up a couple times, if you look at the top right corner of this slide, there's a kind of a turquoise greenish kind of color layout right there, that little kind of corner there. That represents about 6%, I believe, 5 or 6% of our total building footprint that we're using. It's considerably less than 10%. That's what we're looking at, is just the ancillary retail store that was there. In the perfect situation, it would actually be a full retail store, since the delivery service sells all products, not just manufactured products, through our facility. It's a delivery is normal delivery. Ideally, retail would be normal retail in addition to ours. I'll be working and lobbying the city council to have an amendment to that as we move forward, and would love a planning commission decided to make that a contingency that it was full retail. But again, I don't know if that's within purview.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Very good questions. Commissioner Roche.
Thank you everyone for all the great questions, and thank you, Doug, for fielding all our questions, and Planner Clinton, thank you. I had similar questions about security. I also wondered, because the greenhouse is a bit of a unique addition now to the different cannabis operations we've had in the city, it seems like it will be a bit of a target. And so I wonder, just again, did you consider the 24-hour security guard just while you see how that goes? Because like I said, I think, and there is sort of a busy street. I think it's going to be a bit of a draw, and perhaps for a while that might be something that you might want to consider a little more security for, because it's so visible.
Just to touch on that, and sorry if I'm interjecting.
No, go ahead.
But just to touch on that, the requirement was one, the police and where we settled was one. I have 2 security guards at my facility in Stockton. We need more than 1 security guard that will be at this facility, and I'm sure we may end up having 2 or 3 security guards during operational hours and 1 overnight security guard managing. Security and my employee safety is a top priority. I'm, in another less than 30 days, I am a publicly held company trading in three countries with over 5,000 shareholders. We have a fiduciary duty to ensure the safety of my staff. And that's that top priority. So there's a balance. There's really, in my opinion, a balance between, if I look at Stockton, and I reference that because it's roughly the same size. I have 121 security cameras at Stockton, 24/7 monitoring, on-site security guard. I mean, we're steel reinforced, bulletproof windows. So security is very, very high, and in our 470-page plan, it details a lot of that. So yes, just because it requires 1, you have my commitment. There will more than likely be many more than 1. Exactly how many, it's going to be a work in progress as we deem the security needs of the specific facility.
And I'll just add to that. I think it may be possible that some of us are getting hung up on the word greenhouse because we just have a notion of what a greenhouse is. Like when I think of greenhouse, I think of, very translucent walls, kind of thin glass, which is appropriate in some cases. It is definitely not appropriate here. So again, that's a major reason why the greenhouse is being rebuilt, in addition to bringing it up to code, is to make sure it's up to snuff for our police department and what they think will make the site secure. So great question.
Thank you. And also just thinking, because although you're going to have a small retail, you're proposing a small retail location, just because you're saying it's small doesn't mean the clientele is going to be small. And so, you might require a full-time security guard at that location. So anyway, thank you for that. It sounds like, I mean, obviously you have the experience in doing this and how to keep everybody safe. And so I appreciate the thoughts on that. And so speaking of the storefront, I, like my fellow commissioners, was a little surprised by that because we've had similar proposals in an industrial area that did not include a storefront. I think one only included delivery, so there was no kind of walk-up business going on. And so, so my understanding is you can only sell your produced products from the facility. But I saw in the business plan that you can also sell other products like vape pens and cartridges. Is that right? Was that because that's what I saw in the plan? And my concern is we recently passed a ban in the city to limit the sale of flavored tobaccos and things like that for kids. And I just wanted to just understand, when you sell, is that just literally the material, the products you're selling, or are you selling cartridges with smokable? So give me an understanding of what the vape pen and cartridges part of it is.
Sure. I think specifically to deconstruct that question, there's a few components. There's the oil, which is the actual cannabinoids that have been condensed down in a resinous kind of form. Picture that like honey. There's the cartridge that would then be put into. Now you have a vapor cartridge filled with cannabis resin. That vapor cartridge is able to be sold independently on its own, or is able to be sold as a kit, as a cartridge and pen. That is a delivery device that has a very high effectiveness, specifically for neurologic issues and instant onset for pain. So depending on specific ailment or a medicament, there are certain targets. For instance, in our Western IRB approved research registry, it's called an impact study that was approved a few weeks ago, which is pretty huge news. There's only been a few of these approved in the US. It's only taken us 15 months to get this approved. I think 3 of the 6 different ailments, which we have 3 products that we're using for each of those 6 ailments. I think 3 or 5 of them are a vapor pen, specific because of how fast the onset is into the human body versus eating a capsule or a pill, which might take 30 to 50 minutes, depending on your body. I think specific to your question is it going to be labeled like bubblegum or juicy fruit or Tootsie Pop roll and have, sparklies on it and be potentially a conflict with the ban? No. Simple answer is just no.
Okay. And is your intention, are most of your products, are you labeling them more medicinal or holistic sounding to sort of to market to more of that medical community?
There's a split. So the company actually has a dual path. The dual path is we generate revenue from our cultivation, manufacturing, and extraction businesses. For instance, here we have an extraction method that we can produce product for about 70% less than most in the current market. So that's a toll processing method. So somebody brings us 1,000 pounds of cannabis, we check it in, we extract the resin, we properly dispose of it, we sell it, we give them back for a toll processing fee, their refined oil. How much of that is our business model? There is a robbing Peter to pay Paul, to be perfectly honest, in my business. There's the cultivating cannabis, doing toll processing, creating revenue to keep my company afloat, to then take that float and put it over into the research, which drains a whole bunch of money out of it. The net at the end of the day is hopefully I won't have to go raise another $20 million to complete our mission. But if we need to, we will. But the intent and the real mission of our company is a life science company creating novel products based in natural plants to affect human health. That said, we are definitely in the adult use side. I'd say a good, 60 to 70% of the people who purchase from our delivery businesses are because they want to use cannabis products. 30 to 40% are because they actually have some serious ailments, and this is what helps them. The two of them collectively create my business model.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And I also, just for staff, I also was concerned about the time of the operation, because that is a quiet area, once business is shut down. And I would be concerned about safety for the rest of your facility if you have people lined up to purchase products at some of our other locations. I've seen lines around the corner. You might have that even though you have a small facility. So I would also want to look at the timing for now, until, if it's true that this area is going to totally transform, that's going to be a while before that happens. I would consider the timing of the retail operation. And then let's see, I wanted to ask also about the medical emphasis. Is there some sort of grander plan? Maybe this is just a personal question. Is there some grander plan to come up with a prescription level standard so that, it sounds like that's what you're trying to create, so that it does become here's my prescription, so that people understand that. And also, if that's so, are you going to consider, because you're going to have this sort of operation with growing and, lots of other products coming in and out, are you going to consider offering educational classes for other cannabis dispensaries to sort of give a better idea to what their clients should be using, so that we don't have people all over the city, sort of not understanding their own needs when it comes to, their own sort of ability to take it?
What excellent questions. Yes, I think the short answer is yes and yes. I think to answer the second part of your question is I digress to my medical team that actually runs my medical advisory committee. Their other pet project is a company called TME. TME is called Targeted Medical Education. My medical advisory group, made up of the 5 researchers and PhD and double PhDs that are on it, they are the educators of educators. So it's not too often that you get to have the educators of educators as part of your core fundamental team of your company. They actually hold global seminars and publish and disseminate information that is groundbreaking technology specific to oncology and pain-related, inflammation-related oncology symptoms, and what create pragmatic shifts in current treatment of oncology. And for that matter, Dr. Rakesh Patel was recently added to one of the White House's advisory boards that he actually advises on how they are treating telemedicine oncology visits under COVID pandemic. So yes, will we educate and disseminate this information? Absolutely. The outcome of the patient research registries that we have just started, and we've been cleared to start onboarding patients now, that outcome will tell what type of products are working for certain symptoms in what type of people with certain genetic or pre-genetic disposition, which then gives us basis for our global publication and the next round of refinement for our in-house drug development. The short version of that pathway is really, we use chemistry to go into preclinical to create formulation. We use pharmacology to go back to clinical, to go through regulatory and AI learning to then commercialize said product. That's really the short version of a very elaborate business plan.
All right, thank you. It sounds like it's a big education, obviously, and all that. Yeah, I was just curious about, because yours is so specifically sort of geared towards the medical part of it. Might be something other businesses could learn in the future. And then, so going back a little bit to safety, I was just, because cannabis is still a cash business, I'm just wondering, obviously, I saw the safety measures in place for that, but is there also some sort of like statewide, nationwide movement to make, to allow for banks to be, taking this on? Statewide credit unions. It seems like there's huge money to be made in somebody developing a bank that can handle all this, so that, so that there doesn't have to be this big concern that you have cash on hand and everybody knows there's cash in these businesses.
Yeah, we've only been working on that for the last 13 years. Work in progress. There's been a handful of bills that have been killed recently that have been making their way through. I think as point of reference, I do have bank accounts. I do take electronic payments. Most of our payments actually come through electronic payments. I think if my COO was on right now, I would get the definitive, but I think we're about a 60-40 split of electronic payment to cash being the minor and the 40% side. It might even be less cash than that. And I do have banks. So I raised $24 million from 5,000 shareholders, and we're going public. We have a number of banks through our corporate accounts and management companies. So we do regular deposits.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess I was just thinking, part of the safety concern is just knowing that, people went, and the storefronts, I guess, that's usually cash operation. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
A lot of cannabis businesses, especially newer ones, who have not figured out the way to work around the process, unfortunately, they're cash only businesses, and that's how they operate. We are not, and we have not been for many years.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see. I know I need to move on because other people have questions, but I just wanted to go back really quick to the alley, the greenhouse addition in the alley. So I understand that that's being used by another business, but not by, I guess it's not an allowable use of the business that they're using that alley. So my understanding is in approving the conditional permit, where you're going to incorporate that piece into the property that's the Cloudwater property. Is that right?
Exactly. So you might have noticed in the conditions of approval, the lot line, which now is actually kind of in the middle of the greenhouse, as a condition of approval is going to be adjusted. So the entire greenhouse, including the new addition, is all part of that 25571 Clawwater property, the property that's on the corner. And yeah, the business that is next door, 3361, they're an auto repair use. They came and talked to us and said, hey, they've been using this side area for like parking and moving cars and things like that. Per the original site plan for this property that was approved back in the late 80s, that's not what this alleyway was supposed to be used for. It was supposed to actually be for access, but then things changed over time. But it was not supposed to be used for parking. That's, and car storage and things like that. So that was not an approved use of that portion of the property.
Okay, and so then that's no longer a concern for access, emergency access or anything.
Correct. The part of another condition of approval, as you saw in the red kind of new fire department conditions. And the reason they came in so late is because Doug's fire protection engineer and our fire department and our fire protection engineer for the city have been going back and forth to develop an alternative means of protection to make sure that even though, the greenhouse is expanding, that there's ample protection and, fire department connections and an access easement in the back so that all of the buildings, not just the ones for this business, but all of the buildings on the property have adequate protection per the fire department and the fire code.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Sorry. Did you want to add?
I just wanted to touch on just there could be a perception that our approval or the use of our expansion is going to be a detriment to another facility. And I want to add some clarity to that as the neighboring business. That's actually my leased space. I pay for the space. It's my space under my lease. It's been my space for the last 3 years since I've held this property going through this process. They had an illegal paint booth that was discharging harmful chemicals into our groundwater. They illegally washed their vehicles and service and maintain vehicles in that space. And it is an illegal use that is non-conforming. And I am seeking to remedy that and actually start to utilize the space that I pay for and no longer allow them to illegally utilize that space for illegal activities, just to clarify.
Thank you for the clarification. All right. And thank you, Chair. Thank you for answering all my questions.
Thanks, Commissioner Roche. Commissioner Stevens, do you have any comments this evening?
I just have one quick question. So the city banned vaping, tobacco-based vaping. Does that not extend to cannabis?
I am not familiar enough with the tobacco regulations. Jeremy, do you know off the top of your head if it's specified cannabis as well?
I'm going to have to defer to Mike.
Michael, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Commissioner, unfortunately, I didn't work on that, so I don't have a lot of familiarity with that either. I can certainly do some research and we can provide some additional information.
It was more related to the flavored tobacco products, which is, I think, the concern that Commissioner Roche has, that kind of drives inconsistency in how we're making some policies around the city. But anyways, Commissioner Stevens, back to you.
So my only question was, it specifically, the way I read it, relates to tobacco, and it says vaping and related paraphernalia. So I was just curious because the applicant was mentioning they'll be selling vaping paraphernalia, and I was wondering if that was consistent.
I will say the applicant, regardless of what they say in their business plan, needs to be consistent with city codes and regulations, state codes and regulations. So, if it is determined by our code enforcement division, our police department, and others that would not be allowed, then they would be, they must comply. There are conditions that kind of clarify that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Stevens. I had, a similar question just around, why would we ban vaping tobacco, but we would allow vaping marijuana? Well, it's more of a policy question, Doug, versus a applicant question. But, so anyways, but Doug, I do have a few questions for you. So related to, this being more of a life science company, more so than a marijuana retailer and manufacturer, although you're in the marijuana business, how do you plan to, or is there a plan to supplement this product for people who actually need it for medical reasons? Because I know cannabis isn't something that's normally cheap. So if you have medical, clients who can't afford your product, what's your remedy for that?
Sorry, I muted myself. I had some kitty background noise again. We're actually working on a remedy for medical billing codes. We're not quite ready to really unveil that yet, but we have been working on the backside. There are some specific billing codes that may be reimbursable by most standard insurances, and we're trying to work through the nuances of that, utilizing our patient research registry. So as of today, those who would participate in the research registry, we're able to supply the cannabinoid products to them depending on what their state or financial constraints may be. There will be specific concessions made for certain individuals depending on their interest and ability or lack thereof to acquire said products.
So is like, I guess from just the cost perspective, is it cheaper if you have a medical reason versus a retail or a recreational reason, or is it just the same price for everybody?
It's as of now, the current cannabis products that are currently on the market, it's irrelevant if it's a medical or non-medical. The problem is if you look at the volume of cannabinoids typically needed for somebody, say, going through stage 3 cancer, and they have fast metastasizing cells in their body, it becomes very cumbersome and usually not financially reasonable for that person to take the volume of cannabinoids potentially needed to affect the metastasizing cell from replicating. Part of our research and what we're doing is to see how we can dial that in. And if in fact we can, we might not be able to. I might go and dump a whole ton of money down the drain and never come to an answer. That's not our goal. That's not what the company's made for. But at the end of the day, there's a lot more questions than there are answers right now, and we're going to attempt to create some answers on the leaderboard.
Got it. How much of your revenue goes into research? Because you've talked a lot about research.
That's actually the basis of the company. So our website over the course of the next 4 weeks is having a huge pragmatic shift. Right now, if you were to look at our website and everywhere, we look like we are a cannabis company who is going to do some research. That is actually shifting to be a life science research company that its core focus and revenue stream is from the cannabis industry. We may end up finding that some tree bark or some fungus really works well with cannabinoids. We don't know what we don't know, but we are not limited to just cannabis. That just happens to be the mainstay, and what we were able to, and I have a big background in, and what we know that we can grow money and turn plants into cash and revenue that cash into research and maybe make a much bigger impact on society.
Got it. So I guess I'm still trying to I appreciate the words, but I'm just trying to understand from a numbers perspective what this research budget's going to look like. So if you have these 6 departments within your company, how much are you allocating to research? Maybe not the dollar amount, but proportionate of your company's budget.
I can tell you the very first patient research registry that we've just been approved for up to 2,000 patients has a $500,000 research budget, and that's our first of many, many that are coming down the pipeline. Your specific question, I guess sometimes you just have to say you don't know when you don't know. I don't know how much we're going to spend on research. I know that that is our core driving mission and what we are basing the company on, and that the monies that we have and raise will be utilized for that. So I couldn't give you a definitive today. I just know that we will not have the company that we and I envision to have should we not devote all of our resources to that. And for that matter, we have talent coming out of Johnson & Johnson, Bristol Myers, Amyris. We're in the process of hiring for our VP of Science and Technology that literally is coming from really big pharma because of the opportunity and the what we're putting forward. It's a new way to create pharmaceutical alternatives and get them into humans in an expedited pathway. And that's what's really exciting.
Okay, thank you. And then being kind of a medical focused, marijuana dispensary or company, how do you train your people, I guess? So if someone comes in and they're like, well, I have a headache or, I have some other issue. I mean, are your people trained to say, well, perhaps cannabis isn't the right solution for you, or perhaps this kind is, or perhaps, this, all those scientific words you were using? I mean, how do your people know this stuff? Because aren't they going to be like bud tenders, your retailers?
That's a good question. A large part of that is what's unknown. So a large part of that comes from just anecdotal information, unfortunately, at this time. The anecdotal information is simply, I get asked daily from everybody that knows me, that I'm in this industry, hey, I'm going to take this CBD for my pain. Well, CBD is not really going to help you that well for your pain. CBD is a neuroinhibitor that blocks the neurons from receiving the signal from your muscle. But, placebo, everybody wants to take something that they think is going to really, really help them. The research, so you literally asked the question, which is why my company exists. The bulk of people come into a retail facility and say, I have X problem. I've tried all of these different things. Nothing works. Help. This is my last result. It's anecdotal to this point, and somebody like myself and my staff, who we take a huge bit of time to train them understand different cannabinoids, what affects different receptors, how your endocannabinoid system works. There's a huge bit of background that goes into that. And if you looked at our Redwood City or Stockton Yelp or any of the social reviews, you'll see that the defining piece about that is that we actually care. We actually take the time. We offer free patient consultation, so you can call one of our consultation experts. They will spend 2 minutes or an hour talking over your health conditions, your issues, what medications you're taking, products to recommend, and research and resource sites. That is still just anecdotal, which is the best currently available. the outcome of this patient research registry, which is the first of many that we'll have, will actually define and where our products will go, is so that when that person comes in and says, I have a pain scale of 1 to 10. I have a pain scale of 9 consistently daily. It doesn't go away, and I need something to make me better. And I'm currently taking Dilaudid and Opium or opiates. How can I? What helps? They'll be able to look and say, okay, off of this 642 person study, 77% saw a 69% or 78% saw an 82% reduction in their pain scale. You weigh 103 kilograms. You should take this product this many times based on the Science Research Registry. You can scan this QR code. You can participate in a community of others who are using this same product, and you can become part of the feedback loop to see how it's working for you. And this ties in with HIPAA privacy. It links to their physician. We have physicians who onboard these patients. So it's a pretty in-depth program that we have to address the exact question that you asked.
So then is the short answer, yes, your people are provided with extensive training kind of above and beyond what others would be provided at a retail marijuana dispensary?
100%.
Okay, thank you. I think those are all of my questions, but thank you, Doug, for answering all of these and for your very detailed answers. Let's move on to public comments now. So, Ms. Chan, are there any members of the public who wish to address this commission on this item here tonight?
Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. There are no attendees at this time. We do not have any speakers. Thank you.
Sounds good. We probably put them to sleep or they were watching the debates. Okay, let's move back into commissioner comments. So if commissioners have something that they need to say that hasn't been said already, feel free to raise your hand. And remember, it's almost going to be 10 o'clock. So we will start with Commissioner Ali Sullivan.
If my hand was raised, that was unintentional, so I'll lower my hand for the moment.
Okay. Commissioner Andrews, your hand is up as well. Did you have a comment to make?
I would like to think about public art still. And I know that might be a nuisance, but more of an accent wall similar to Stockton, something simple. I respect the minimalist approach that you have to your design, and I acknowledge the wood paneling, but I would like to see if the applicant would be amenable to that.
The question for response?
Yeah, that's for you, Doug.
If it becomes a condition of approval and I must in order to receive my approval, I will, but I would prefer not to.
Okay, and then the second question for the applicant is, given that you did give the example of cleaning up the streets nearby, and I appreciate that as a community benefit, and I agree with you that having something that's tangible and physical and can see the community benefit is very, I think that's the best kind of community benefit as well. So I just wanted to know, would you be interested in adopting a block that needs to be cleaned on a regular basis, not necessarily every day, but you commit to a time to clean, and then it also gives you the opportunity for advertising because it's an adopted block?
I don't know much. It's the first time hearing about that program. Can you elaborate a little bit more about what that entails?
Sure. So you have a sign at a particular corner, area of greatest need, preferably near your business, and you commit to cleaning up the street. And then you collect the trash, put it in a bag, and then you put it in Access Hayward, and City of Hayward comes and picks it up.
Got it. And just for clarification, thank you for that. Is that above and beyond the 3/4 of a city block that I would be occupying, cleaning, beautifying, and maintaining as part of my project?
We could ask staff to find the the nuisance area that's closest to you, that would be something that wouldn't be too much of a stretch. But that area, I did see a lot of trash in that area when I drove by today.
There's a lot of trash in that area, and it doesn't help that these 2+ buildings have sat empty for 2.5 years.
True.
We're just maintaining landscaping, which will be completely different when we occupy. I think if anything, if we were doing some cleaning, I think I would like to commit to cleaning the immediate area adjacent to my properties, to enhance that versus some other,
That's understandable.
multiple blocks away. I'd have no problem committing to that. To what extent that is, I don't know if there's definitive KPIs to that, but sure.
Okay, sure. You can work with maintenance on and find something reasonable near your location.
Sure.
All right, Commissioner Andrews, thank you. Commissioner Roche.
I just wanted to go back really quick to the timing, the hours of operation for the retail. If we were to approve it with some reduced hours of operation, is that something the staff has to work with the applicant on, or is that something we can propose as a proposal for as an amendment to the approval this evening?
It's something you can propose as long as you have a second. It can carry with your vote.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Roche. Let's see here.
Chair, the applicant has a question.
Okay, this isn't the time for the applicant though, so maybe.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Commissioner Goldstein.
Yeah, thank you. Once again, bringing up the public art thing. Elizabeth, how familiar are you with other public art projects? Who's involved? What kind of art projects have been approved that might be appropriate for this project?
There are a range of different projects. Murals are a very typical one, which I think is why it's front of mind. We have a mural art program in the city. I'm also the planner on the Heinz project across the street. They're having an art consultant come in that is looking at a wide range of different options, not just sculptures and murals and that sort of thing, but incorporating tile work or glass or building components and things like that in interesting ways. So there's definitely a range of different artistic features that could be added to a project that's not necessarily painting a mural. That's definitely something that we as planning staff could work with the applicant on if the commission so desires.
Yeah, I would like that discussion to happen. In fact, I think it ought to be a discussion on every project that comes before us. If you don't mind adding that to your notes, so one more thing for you to do, I'd really appreciate that. It kind of warms the plate a little bit and gets people understanding about what our objectives are for the community. With all due respect, Doug, I don't think it would take away from your business. I think there's a way to add an aesthetic to it that contributes to the immediate vicinity of your area without detracting from your business aesthetic. So please take that under consideration and have that conversation with Elizabeth.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Goldstein. Anything else?
No.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Stevens, please.
Thank you. I'm very supportive of this project. I like the design as it is. I'm also a real fan of not concentrating cannabis sales in downtown. So I'm also a fan of, I would really like to see the retail here brought to full capacity at some point in the future. I also think in terms of hours of operation, I think that because it's a CUP and since the city can monitor that, I think there's a chance to actually see how that operates and see how it works. So I wouldn't be in favor of adjusting the hours of operation.
Thanks, Commissioner Stevens. Commissioner Ali Sullivan.
Thank you. So, Doug, I just wanted to thank you for the comprehensive application that you put forward. Obviously, you've put in a lot of time, effort, and thought into this. The concerns I had, obviously, on the patio piece, I was under the impression that that was open to the public. So it's the clarity of it being private is very useful. The security question that I think a couple of us raised, helpful to understand that, the reality is you are also self-incentivized to increase security to ensure that your property is protected. So good to hear the commitment on your part that you'll have more than one single person there. On the hours front, though, I do have I do have a real concern there, and not taking it as gospel, but looking at Google Maps and hours of the adjacent businesses, it does not appear that any of them, aside from the 76 gas station, are retail. And all of the adjacent businesses appear to close between 3:30 and 6 p.m. And so, having something operating late at night when it's dark in an area doesn't have a lot of eyes on the street as you would have in a central business district, I think does present some security concerns for me. And so my preference would be that, we start out with a more constrained hours of operation as the area either develops or as we review any potential nuisance issues or security issues or trash issues, anything of that sort, we can get a better sense of, if we're constraining business or if it's appropriate to leave it at a reduced hours. But I would be in favor of a reduction in the hours of operation for the retail establishment.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Commissioner Ali Sullivan? Okay. So I, too, had some concerns around, one security guard. So I was happy to hear that it's going to be more than one. And then also, going to Commissioner Ali Sullivan's comment, I think, when I think about security, it's more than just the security of this building and of the people, but it's of the people who are going to be shopping there, at these hours of the night when it's dark. It's getting darker sooner. And one of the things that I know that we've had, we've had to make sure we were really disciplined on around our current cannabis clubs is by, ensuring that there's not consumption on site. And this just feels like a perfect place to do it. I mean, you can go not on your site, but right up the block. I can go and park my car in a dark neighborhood and, smoke pot, and I'm not in front of anyone's house, and it's a closed business. So I shared the concerns around, the hours of operation. I don't necessarily agree with, this becoming a full retail. I think that we need to be wiser in the city around, how much retail we're going to have, because it seems like, we can't get a grocery store in here, but every other week we're seeing cannabis pot, cannabis club applications. And then, we're sneaking in, well, it's a micro business. So now we get a storefront added to it. And it's like, well, if we agree to do 23 commercial licenses, I hope that's not going to be 23 commercial storefronts attached to it, no matter how big they are. So those are kind of, my general concerns. I do agree that the application was comprehensive. I do appreciate the diversity in the services that this organization is going to be providing. I mean, everything from cultivation to manufacturing, test labs, delivery. So I really appreciate that. I would like to see, really strong commitment to community service and making sure that that area is clean, because I can just, see things getting out of hand in a dark area really quickly. So those are my kind of final comments this evening. Commissioner Roche, it looks like your hand's up. Do you have an additional comment you would like to make this evening?
I do, and I didn't mean to interrupt you. Are you done with your comment?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to ask really quickly, if we were to limit the hours of operation, if that, if we make an amendment like that, does that affect the delivery operation as well? Because I can appreciate that the delivery operation might be more of a late night thing. So it wouldn't. So the storefront hours can be separated from your delivery option. Okay. Just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Okay. So usually we don't allow the applicant to speak during this period, but Doug, if you are really brief in your comments, we'll give you 60 seconds. Go. You're on mute, though.
Unmute.
Go for it.
It was simply to the hours. We actually envisioned that we might only be open till 5. We might only be open until 6. Our hours, just so everybody clearly hears, we're not in the business to go piss money down the drain. We will only be open when we have customers to serve. We know most businesses around that area are pretty much vacant by 5. We envision we'll probably be done by 5 or 6, but who knows? I would hate for you to limit on a potential unknown when there's purview by city and CUP and PD that we could change and limit those hours if there's an issue. We are fully aware we're going to try to limit those only when we're actually able to see customers. And we think that's going to be actually no later than 6 for a single shift for a single day. But hopefully you don't limit the hours.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, so let's see. Is there any other final comments from any commissioners? Commissioner Roche? No. Okay. Well, hearing none, we all know what this recommendation is. So the recommendation is that we approve this conditional use permit along with the required findings and subject of the conditions of approval. Is there a motion for that? Let's see, hands up. Yes, Commissioner Stevens.
I will make a motion to approve the conditional use permit as stated in the staff report.
Goldstein seconds.
Okay, excellent. Is there any commission discussion? Yes, there's 2 hands that are up for this. So Commissioner Roche, the floor is yours. You're on mute, Commissioner Roche.
So Commissioner Stevens, I'm wondering, and based on your comments, I'm assuming you won't be amenable to it, but I was wondering if you would add an amendment limiting the hours of operation to 6 p.m.
Well, I feel uncomfortable with that because I feel that the city and its staff should be regulating that, just like they should be regulating all the other issues related to odor and everything else. I feel that that's a really slippery slope. So I respect what everybody said here, but I feel uncomfortable with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Commissioner Ali Sullivan.
I was going to make the same ask of Commissioner Stevens if you'd be amenable to including an amendment to his motion to allow operations up to 6 p.m.
Okay, thank you for that. Commissioner Andrews.
I was wondering if Commissioner Stevens would accept a friendly amendment to add the adopt a block and an accent wall.
I think those are acceptable to me.
Thank you.
Excuse me, what was that?
To adopt a block and the accent wall are acceptable modifications to the motion.
Thank you.
Thank you. The seconder of the motion, Commissioner Goldstein, are you fine with that friendly amendment?
Yeah, I accept it.
Okay, thank you. So the maker of the motion, yes, Commissioner Ali Sullivan.
Chair Bonilla, apologies that I haven't followed up on my Robert's Rules of Order. If a commissioner was inclined to make a motion that included said amendment, is that possible?
So the way that would work is this would go for a vote. And if it doesn't pass, then you can make a motion or anyone else can make a motion with any amendments that you want to it. But if the maker of the motion doesn't accept it, then we would have to vote it down and make a motion that we can all accept. Okay, so that's actually what we're gonna do now is we're gonna vote. So Secretary Chan, would you mind doing a roll call vote, please?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
I just want to be clear on the motion and the amendments. Okay, so Commissioner Stevens made the motion, seconded by Commissioner Goldstein. Then Commissioner Roche made a friendly amendment to reduce the hours of retail operation, and this was not accepted. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Then Commissioner Ali Sullivan said something about 6 p.m. Was that a friendly amendment that was not accepted, or he just mentioned it?
Correct. He was just supporting what Commissioner Roche was saying, but it was respectfully declined by the maker of the motion.
I'd like that reflected in the minutes that it was a request for a friendly amendment.
So it was actually a friendly amendment by Commissioner Ali Sullivan, right?
Correct.
Thank you. Then we have Commissioner Andrews, who made a friendly amendment for the adopt the block and the
Accent wall.
accent.
Yes, accent wall.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, and both Commissioner Stevens and Commissioner Goldstein accepted that friendly amendment, those two friendly amendments.
They did.
Now, what I need to know, are these to be conditions of approval?
Yes, there to be conditions of approval to be added. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Let's go.
Let's do it.
I have to be clear on everything. So bear with me. Thank you. All right. Commissioner Ali Sullivan.
Alphabetical roll call does not work in my favor. It was. Aye.
Commissioner Andrews.
Normally it's me that's first, so I welcome you here. Aye.
Yes, it changed. Commissioner Goldstein.
Aye.
Commissioner Roche.
Aye.
Commissioner Stevens.
Aye.
Chair Bonilla.
Aye.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So the motion unanimously passes with 7 yes votes, actually 6 yes votes, 0 decline, 0 abstentions. So thank you, Doug, for being here, and have a great evening, and welcome to your next phase of this work in Hayward. All right, so moving along to the approval of our meeting minutes, our next item on the agenda. October 8th meeting notes were distributed. Hopefully all of you guys read them. Is there a motion to approve?
I move the item.
Excellent. Thank you, Commissioner Andrews. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Stevens. Ms. Chan, would you mind taking a roll call vote, please?
Okay, hang on one second. Thank you. That was Commissioner Andrews who made the motion?
That's correct. And then it was seconded by Commissioner Stevens.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Commissioner Ali Sullivan.
Aye.
Commissioner Andrews.
Aye.
Commissioner Goldstein.
Aye.
Commissioner Roche.
Aye.
Commissioner Stevens.
Yes.
Chair Bonilla.
Aye.
Thank you.
Excellent. So it looks like the meeting minutes of the October 8th Planning Commission meeting have unanimously passed with 6 yes votes, 0 no's, and 0 abstentions. Thank you. Next is we will go to Jeremy for oral reports on planning and zoning matters.
Yeah, good evening. I just wanted to let the commission know that earlier this week, the City Council held a very wonderful work session for a brokers panel. And it was really intended to be informative to the commission and to the council and to members of the community about how the COVID pandemic has really impacted commercial uses and multifamily uses. And it was very well received. I would just encourage any member of the commission, as well as members of the public, that if you did not listen to that, feel free to go on the city's website. The video is available, so you're more than welcome to stream that. But it was very informative. I think it'll be very insightful moving forward to understand what the full economic impact of the COVID pandemic will be. But that was a collaboration between the Planning Division, Economic Development, and the City Manager's Office for bringing that forward. So just as a matter of good public information, definitely worthwhile if you haven't seen that to take a look at that. The only other thing is, just as a friendly reminder, we have one planning commission meeting right now scheduled in November. It's November 12th. As of now, we don't have anything currently scheduled, so it's quite possible that the planning commission will have a very long break because the second meeting is Thanksgiving and we will not have a meeting for the second meeting in November. So unless that meeting gets, nothing gets scheduled for that meeting, we probably won't have anything until December. So I just wanted to give the commission an update on that.
Jeremy, I think we would all happily accept that early holiday gift. So, you know, if that happens, thank you. And if not, we'll be here. You know where to find us. But thanks for that great update. Anything else, Jeremy? Okay. Moving on to commissioner announcements and referrals. Do any commissioners this evening have any announcements? Yes, Commissioner Andrews?
Well, Jeremy stole my thunder because I was going to talk about that presentation. I found it very, very informative. I concur. You should definitely listen and take in all the good information the brokers had about industrial space as we make transition due to COVID, and there's actually a lot of opportunities there. They did talk about the increase of renters in our city, and it's an 8% renter increase. And also just doing the things that we actually talked about as a commission of having flexibility of uses, looking at some of the models that we thought were working that weren't working in our city were actually validated during this presentation. And we were actually kind of ahead of the curve by saying some of the things that we've been doing on these projects. So I think it was a very validating experience as well as informative. So thank you for the Economic Development Department for helping putting that on because I learned a lot.
Thank you, Commissioner Andrews. Commissioner Goldstein.
Yeah, thank you. So, you know, I noticed when we're meeting in person and we have a new person come on the commission with us that we, at the very least, have a round of handshaking and backslapping and all of that. And we missed that with this opportunity with Commissioner Ollie Sullivan. So I just wanted to say, welcome. We appreciate you being, part of the commission. And your intelligent insights that you bring to the table are very much appreciated. So hope you're feeling the warmth here.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Goldstein. And believe me, I look forward to when we can all meet up in person and get those backslaps and handshakes. So looking forward to that day, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Okay, well, thank you both for those comments. Any additional comments this evening from any of the commissioners? Okay, I'll just have my one comment, which is get out and vote, people. You know, we only got 12 days left before the big day is here. So get out, make your vote and your voice count. There's some, important elections that are happening at the city level. We got to get our new city council on place. We got some important, city, county and statewide, and of course, national initiatives on that ballot that we all need to get out and vote for. So with that, I will see you guys all, and we will see each other again, perhaps in later November or December, one of the two. But until then, everyone stay safe, take care, and get out and vote. Bye, everyone. Good night.
The recording has stopped.